From Amazing Heroes number 67, cover dated March 15th, 1985. Checking in on Neal and Chris Adams by Gil Jordan. Neal Adams' Continuity Publishing had hardly left the starting gate before it ran into some rough weather. The slow death of Pacific Comics, Continuity's collaborator in publication, promotion, and distribution, Chris Adams. Our first problem was when Pacific went out of business. We were basically packaging and publishing 4 books, and they were taking care of our separations and printing and distribution. When they went out of business, we had to find our own separator and printer, and do the distribution of our own line. That was one problem. The second problem was finding a printer, which we finally did, and getting credit set up with him, which takes about a month to do. Then we got schedules and started rolling. Neal Adams continued, "You don't have a problem until your printer discovers that your sizes are wrong, or your subject matter is wrong, or he's too far away, or you discover he can't ship cheaply or whatever." And we ran into one of those problems. It wasn't a major problem, but it was an insurmountable problem. So he had to shop for another printer. Outside of that problem, there was also scheduling problems. He didn't seem to be available to put our stuff on the press when his representative said he was available to put our stuff on the press. Now we're with Ronald's in Canada, and they seem to be much more professional, much better. We're very happy. Neal entered a debate about proper pricing for comic books, especially at his caliber, how things were trending upwards from $150 to $175 to $2, and how their natural inclination was to just jump to $2. We're presenting a new face to the readers, and that is that all our books will be high quality color and high quality reproduction on high quality stock. What we're saying is that comic books ought to be presented this way a little more. To a certain extent, that's a new idea, and a new idea meets a certain amount of resistance on the business end. But this is a transient thing if the idea is successful, if the idea is logical. The other thing is that you have to produce the kind of material that people want to buy. So we're trying to find the price that's correct for our material, and hopefully we'll find material that's correct for the marketplace. And if things turn out to be that way, then I think we'll do all right. It's important to remember that we're a new publisher, and we don't have any incredible plans to take over the universe. We do have plans to try to find the kind of things that we like to see and like to read and put them in comic book form and present them to the public. We're just so happy to be in the comic book field. Once again, be able to have our stuff seen. And the price of it is that we have to publish it ourselves. It wasn't anything that we looked for. It just turned out that way. But since we're doing it, we intend to be publishers of a quality that people will respect and enjoy our material. That's basically it. We don't have any big plans. We just hope people like what we do.
Hey, I put on his armor. I put on his armor. I put on his armor. Every morning make me stronger.
He said I put on his armor. I put on his armor. I put on his armor in case Satan wants some drama.
From the Slings and Arrows comic guide. Armor. Even amongst a company that prizes artwork as much as continuity, Armor stands head and shoulders above its companion titles. Pencilers Tom Grindberg, Sal Voluto, and particularly the excellent Brian Apthorpe all produced some fine work, but it was the superlative inks of Rudy Nebris that raised this title to its lofty artistic height. Sadly, the fine art was saddled with continuities, typically adult stories, and English as a second language dialogue. The title's nadir comes with number 10's hard-hitting drug expose, Cracky the Clown's Crack House, which was every bit as stupid as you'd imagine it to be. The second series is chapters of the company crossover Death Watch 2000, but as with the first, a comic to savor visually, but on no account to be read. From the January 1st, 1985 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 62, 1985 preview special. Armor and Silver Streak, written and drawn by Neal Adams, published by Continuity Associates, full color, $1.50 bi-monthly direct sale. With the demise of Pacific Comics, Neal Adams' Continuity Associates will begin distributing its own comics. During the changeover period, all the company's titles have been delayed, but that should not be a permanent condition. Armor and Silver Streak are twin brothers who are superheroes. The two of them have very different personalities and are often at odds with one another. They will be linked to and will occasionally team up with Megalith, Continuity's other hero. For more information on Megalith, see the Zero Patrol preview later in this issue. The backup to Armor and Silver Streak is an interesting character called Crazyman, whose power is in his insanity. The guy just freaks out in public, a Continuity spokesman told us. The creators of Crazyman are Tim Ryan and Will Youngkin, who also bring the readers the series AE35 in Continuity's Echo of Future Past. Some of these announcements were amended or expanded in the Amazing Heroes preview special from the summer of 1985. For instance, of the book still called Armor and Silver Streak, they noted that Megalith would be in his own title that would carry the Crazyman strip, and also that the miniseries will end with the brothers making their escape and returning to find the Earth is still more or less intact. In addition, Armor and Silver Streak will be shown to have a superpowered sister who may very well spin off into her own title at a later date. The timelines get a little squirrely here, but we'll jump to The Revengers featuring Armor and Silver Streak number 1, cover dated September 1985. For those keeping track, this is a second title in the indicia called The Revengers. No mention of the Revengers on the cover to this book, unlike with Megalith. This comic has one of the friendlier opening sequences. Our main characters are Canadians. They are the siblings Jacqueline, Jack, and and Jacques. Jacqueline's boyfriend is a soccer hooligan who tries to bully Jacques, who is defended by Jack, who is himself a bit of a bully. Jack has black hair. Jacques has blonde hair. I think that Jacques is the youngest of the siblings, but they're remarkably close in age. Aliens attack their Canadian town and basically start indiscriminately killing and blowing things up. Brothers Jack and Jacques try to look out for their family. Jack finds the car that his sister had driven away in with the body of the bullying guy from earlier. She's not brought up again in the book. Jacques takes a motorbike home, is greeted by his parents, who are promptly blown to hell. Jack and Jacques meet up in the ruins of their family home, then rush to an armory. Jack karate kicks down the door, and they start loading up on weapons. I'm not super familiar with Canadian townships, but I wasn't aware that it was common practice to have a fully stocked armory in any given Canadian town. I'd have thought Michael Moore would have brought that up in Bowling for Columbine, but maybe it was an oversight. The earthen weapons really can't do much against the aliens, but Jack shows so much moxie that he's captured by the aliens. He's tested by a light blue-skinned, multi-nostriled, four-armed Tars Tarkin stand-in named Gogog. When it's eventually determined that he has the potential to be a rare level 10 fighter, he's subjected to cybernetic surgeries and intensive training over the course of several years to live up to that potential. It should be noted that Jacques had appeared to perish in a chemical warfare assault to look like something like mustard gas that supposedly had gotten him. Chapter 2 begins on page 20, where we see several years down the line, Jack is now some sort of a ninja. He has a red, black, and silver outfit, very ornate, lots of blades all over the place. He is something of the Wolverine of this comic book line, and instead of the flares on his mask, he has what appears to be blades for ears, sort of like that thing that Xena used to throw. He has two of those, one on each side of his head. He otherwise just has one of those headscarf things, like a Ninja Turtle, but it's a skull cap, so you can't see his hair. And he basically runs around, smashes stuff, throws shurikens. He's again being tested by Gogog, who he is able to some degree, best. They're not actually fighting, but he pulls a hole, gets a blade to the guy's throat, tells him, "I'm tired of your tests," yada yada. But then the big bad, Rage, a towering red satanic alien with ant-like mandibles, demands a final test and materializes in a figure in silver and blue with SS on his chest, wearing a helmet, who is apparently going to be the last person that Armor is going to have to fight to prove himself. And thus ends the first issue. Armor number 1 was one of Continuity's most interesting and best-selling comics. The cover was initially used as a house ad for a book presumed to be named Armor, based on that being the largest word in typeface on the page. However, the only logo is for Continuity Comics, and there's no copyright information. I know that it was featured in the first issue of Revengers, starring the Ultimate Man Megalith in 1985. This is of course different from the Revengers featuring Armor and Silver Streak number 1, which came out a few months later. Also, the logo on the cover is just Armor, with no reference to Revengers, but with the Armor logo featured a second time along with the Silver Streak logo in the banner above the title. But back to the house ad, it features only 2/3 of the finished cover, cropping out half of Armor's left thigh and all of his left arm. The tail of his headscarf is not obscured by any text, and the shot is zoomed in tighter and larger than in the final image. The coloring is more or less the same, but the tint and exposure are brighter, showing much more of the line work. Most strikingly, the metallic gleam coming off the armor is uncolored, and thus is brighter, but also they are smaller and fewer. In the house ad, the gleams are surrounded by violent splatters of ink and whiteout. This is very telling, because Continuity was notorious for enforcing a house style where most everyone seemed to be redrawn by Adams to mirror his work, especially the faces. And yet here's Adams himself clearly aping the style of one of his former imitators, Bill Sienkiewicz. Now in the finished cover, Adams reworks the glares so the splatter was largely removed or severely muted by deep blue coloring. The glare now shot out further from the body in straight lines, filling up more of the inky black negative space. That may have been the only intent in alteration. It still looks like Bill Sienkiewicz, but less like his later Moon Knight work and more like a Dazzler cover. When Armor number 1 was released, it was among the first comics to have metallic inks on the cover, but only on the Armor logo. However, the silver-gray metallic ink matched the white-gray coloring of the character enough to give the illusion that the enhancement was more expansive. The direct market version of Armor number 1 went into a second printing, which essentially matched the non-enhanced recoloring of the newsstand edition. This is the version of the comic that I own and my coloring preference. Here, the Armor logo is rendered in deep red, with the tint much darker, making the features of the character's face and overall line work more obscure. You get a greater sense of Armor coming out of the shadows, the reds of his costume implying greater intent of violence. The copy from the house ad is rendered, as Continuity was wont to do, as a dialogue balloon with extra punctuation for the protagonist. "For you to live, I must die, but Armor will not die." Besides speaking in the third person, Armor also manages the rare combination exclamation point and ellipse, which I'm pretty sure is grammatically grammatically illegal. I should have mentioned that as the cover zooms back, we see Armor hunched over, bleeding from the abdomen, wielding weapons. It looks like a 2-foot protractor or a one-sided deer horn knife combined with a slaughter blade, with one smooth edge and a handle in the middle. His previously cropped left arm was shown to be open, palm up, giving a come on gesture. Not unlike the single finger gesture made on Frank Miller and Joe Rubinstein's iconic cover to the first issue of the 1982 Wolverine miniseries. Honestly, it feels like Adams was compelled to make an improvement, as the awkward feet pose left room to do so. Like Wolverine, Armor was announced as a 4-issue miniseries, necessarily converted into an ongoing, since the origin story ultimately took 7 issues. Also, like Wolverine #1, Armor is probably the only continuity comic to be homaged, or less kindly, blatantly plagiarized by other artists. Admittedly, not nearly as much in Armor's case, but I would still argue its virtues, especially in comparison to John Buscema's lame, rarely attributed cover to the Wolverine ongoing series. Oh, by the way, I remember having seen Armor #1 at B. Dalton Booksellers, but I believe it was much later than 1985, and I did not buy it then. The $2 price would have been highly prohibitive, with most comics costing less than half as much, and there was frankly too little Armor in the book. The combination of Neal Adams and Tom Grinberg on art weakens both, and they spend most of the issue drawing younger teen boys in casual wear. The 5 pages featuring Armor as Armor, dressed as Armor in armor, are sandwiched between what looks like a Sears catalog from the 70s and an 8-page Earth 4 backup story where they battle building contractors. See Amazing Heroes episode 3 for that one. Amusingly, 1986's Amazing Heroes preview special #2 is only just getting around to Armor and Silver Streak #2, featuring the cover. They still think the book is written and inked by Neal Adams, penciled by Tom Grindberg, and assuming it to be a 5-issue miniseries. Armor and Silver Streak is a story of 2 brothers who are spirited away from Earth. Their captor, an alien named Rage, is a slaver who kidnaps beings, trains them, and then sells them on other worlds. In space slaver terms, Armor has the potential to achieve the status of a 10 in the warrior class. In other words, he's a hell of a good fighter. Already possessing a love for the martial arts, he will train to become the ultimate combatant. Rage will take it upon himself to instruct Armor personally. Silver Streak, on the other hand, is only a 7, which qualifies him to do nothing more than menial labor. The aliens transform his body in such a way that he will be able to absorb energy into himself, amplify it, and then transmit it outward through his hands. It is intended that he uses power in mining operations and construction work. Silver Streak will begin to form contact with some of the other beings held captive and discover they are conspiring to take over Rage's mothership. In a final act of irony, Armor and Silver Streak are pitted against one another in the gladiatorial arena, neither recognizing the other because of the masks they wear. This in turn will lead to a confrontation between Armor and his mentor, Rage. In a bit of a self-own in a letter column for Armor and Silver Streak #2, it's noted that the first issue failed to offer any editorial material or to direct readers where to send letters, so they received one long letter from the determined Kurt Tiger, and Neal Adams opted to spend the other half of the letters page answering the one letter. He notes of Tom Grindberg, he's been penciling for DC Comics for some time now, and I think his recent cover for Warlord shows what his style looks like when inked by somebody else. In fact, the issue of Armor and Silver Streak that you hold in your hands has been inked by Rudy Nebris, with only a little help from yours truly. Corey Adams' color adds that special uniqueness that will mark all of our publications. We feel that there is no better colorist in the field, and to call what Corey does coloring is to make it less than it is. Corey is developing a fan following that rivals many pencilers. Chris Adams, our editor, has learned that editors never get credit, but ever since issue #1 of Armor and Silver Streak has come out, she's been walking around beaming like the cat that caught the canary. I'm loath at this point to mention any more Adams, but the truth is the inspiration behind Armor is one Jason Adams, who not only inspired but helped to design Armor and Rage. Jason interrupts his own martial arts training each week in order to correct Armor's uniform anytime Tom or Rudy or I get it wrong. Concerning Jack and Jacques' personalities, I wouldn't worry too much about Jacques. For context, there was some concern that there was going to be a Hawk and Dove situation where Armor was going to be the badass and Silver Streak was going to be the pacifist, but minutia points out that Silver Streak can throw a punch if he needs to, although it's also clear that Armor has something of a hair trigger, not unlike Hank Hall. Back to Neal Adams, the limited series. I'm not usually the one to jump to conclusions, but I think I can safely predict that Armor and Silver Streak will go beyond its miniseries introduction, assuming Armor and Silver Streak survive Rage's rage. Just a few more editorial comments. Here at Continuity, we are having a whole lot of fun turning out these new titles. For those of you who have not heard what these titles are, Toy Boy will be coming your way very soon, as well as Samuree, Mistress of the Martial Arts. Because we need to work so far ahead, we're sort of in a different time frame than you are, but it looks like we're actually going to get the time schedule of our publications in line. We've been asked here at Continuity to respond to some of the sniping, conscious or otherwise, that's been going on in the business. Some of it aimed at us. Let me make our attitude perfectly clear about, number 1, Dick Giordano. He's one of the best friends I've ever had, and DC Comics is lucky to have him. 2, Jim Shooter. He's done more for Marvel Comics in the last 10 years than anyone, and I think that he deserves to be ranked up there with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. 3, the other alternative publishers. They and we are trying really hard to produce books that you'll like. We support them and hope that you do too. For the comic industry as a whole, it's just beginning. Thankfully, the second issue of the Revengers trademark featuring Armor trademark and Silver Streak trademark number 2, June 1986, now features inks by Rudy Nebras and moves past the Tandy Whiz kids in Intergalactic War. Instead, we have brother versus brother and one must die. They don't know this, mainly because they're both wearing masks. One of those rare instances where the comic book trope of people wearing masks actually makes sense because you're trying to have one brother kill the other brother. They haven't seen each other in a few years, so they wouldn't necessarily recognize one another anyway. On the plus side, the cover features Armor done all metallic like heavy metal. That looks cool. And they make reference to introducing the Silver Streak. We already knew that kid from back when. Don't worry, we'll cover it. The rest of the cover's not great though, because you've got Rage, who is weird and sort of demonic, but also got the spider pincer thingies, kind of looks like an Ant-Man. He's quoting Rolling Stones. "Ah, pleased to meet you. Hope you guessed my name." And then our hero, the titular star of this book, presumably, we only see him with his gauntlet and his hand holding a dagger, about to apparently stab the guy who he's screaming is Rage. And yet that is the guy's name. But if you're just now buying the book, you don't know that. So it just seems like some guy's randomly screaming Rage. Okay, but over what? What's going on? You know, what's happening here? Armor and Silver Streak have a fight. Silver Streak manages to pin Armor to a wall with energy blast. Armor uses his ear boomerang things thrown to cut off the helmet of Silver Streak. The brothers realize who each other are. They embrace. The trainer Gogog tries to separate the two. Armor threatens to kill him. Rage triggers a trap door that sends Silver Streak falling. Gogog apparently retreats, but Rage sends Thrax the Dainty, a large four-armed alien, to fight Armor. Armor is mostly preoccupied with trying to cut his way through the floor of the spaceship to find his brother. When he's approached by Jaundice Targus, Armor slashes at the guy's knee. When the alien comes at him again, he's disemboweled. I suppose because the blood is brown and green, it doesn't count, but there's definitely some slinging intestines there. And when the alien still won't stop, he gets stabbed in where you would expect a heart to be, although he technically doesn't die because they make a point of mentioning that he's still trembling at least. Armor finally uses blades to cut his way through a floor where he's piled on by a bunch of little green gremlin things. They're small, but they're heavy, and he's already tired out from trying to work his way through the floor. Rage shows up and informs Armor that he is also a 10, and that he remembers that when he gained his freedom through some sort of gladiatorial match, he went after the person who had sold him into slavery and killed him slowly. He's intent on teaching Armor the lesson that that's not going to happen. Meanwhile, Silver Streak is recruited by some alien renegades that are planning a mutiny. However, Rage is onto them and sends forces that successfully rout the mutineers. When Armor finally has a go at Rage himself, he's mocked and swiftly disarmed, by which I mean Rage chops his hand off. We see the hand flying through the air. We see the bony stumps. We see a nice broad splash of blood. It's a full-page spread. I'm starting to think that maybe this is where Jeff Johns gets it from. Maybe this is that missing piece that explains why this keeps happening in DC comic books, the whole dismemberment thing. We are treated to several pages of Armor bleeding out, the shock and disgust of seeing his severed appendage lying about. He passes out. He wakes up more or less crucified. Rage flaunts the severed hand directly in his face, talking about how that he has microsurgeons that can easily reattach to everything. But in the end, he pretty much puts the hand in the Cuisinart for another gore shot. The issue ends with the unmasked, screaming Jack Keaton going, "No," in a very Darth Vader in the last Star Wars prequel way. And they make sure to give us a shot of the stump once again, looking like it's modeling to some degree or something. The Amazing Heroes Preview Special number 3, dated summer 1986. There's blurbs for Megalith and Miss Mystic that don't add much, although jabs are already being taken. They talk about getting Miss Mystic out on a bi-monthly schedule with new penciler Brian Murray, and there's a line in there about you kids stop giggling in the back. And as for Megalith, it's noted that although this preview seems familiar ground for readers of the 1986 winter preview, editor Neal Adams feels confident that continuity scheduling problems are behind them, and this book will be seen on a more regular basis, like more than once a year. The Jabs continue into Armor and Silver Streak, where they nickname editor Christine, stop me if you've heard this one before, Adams, regarding a more regular shipping schedule. They also refer to Jock Keaton as Jock, Jock, so presumably a lot of these blurbs were given over the telephone. They also give some spoilers for issue number 2 of Armor. As their adventures continue, Armor has his hand removed by Rage, the meanest scumsucker since Darth Vader. The razzing continues in the Amazing Heroes preview special number 4, Winter 1987. For the Megalith entry, they say, check out our last preview special. The only substantial bit is under Armor and Silver Streak. Issue number 2 did come out as prophesized in the 3rd preview special, with the issue number 3 ready for release at the end of 1986. Maybe. We have a bottleneck at the printer, says Chris Adams, Continuity's vice president. We're working toward finalizing our schedule. The plot has advanced a little since the last entry for this title. Jack and Jock Keaton, aka Armor and Silver Streak, are inducted into the group of rebels aboard the pirate armada and plan a massive escape of all the slaves through a clever route. They land on a planet where Rage, the pirate leader, and Armor have a showdown. One must die. Guess which one? The final problem our heroes must solve is how to get back to Earth, which you know they do since they pop into another title from Continuity, Megalith. The cover to Armor number 3, inexplicably the Revengers trademark featuring Megalith trademark number 3, February 1987. Megalith is not in this comic book. Anyway, it returns to what made Armor number 1 work because it's got the red logo, it's got Armor wielding melee weapons and looking cool, doing martial arts stuff. This book has way more aliens than you would have expected though, right? He's hitting an alien with the 3-part nunchuck thingies. Opening page, Jagir Glastoon, mothership of the Raider Armada of the Grig Palatron, who is commonly referred to as Rage, is hovering over a mineral-laden planetoid. On the planetoid is an artificial atmosphere bubble. Rage and his raiders use this planetoid as a training ground for captive slaves. Minerals are mined by slaves. Raw materials are sold, and the slaves, when properly trained, are sold. Mining specialists are very valuable to outworld planets, especially specialists who have the natural ability to absorb energy. This ability, when augmented scientifically and mechanically, can make an individual entity more powerful and effective than whole teams of miners and machines. So powerful indeed, they are a danger to themselves. And so this one is actually more about the Silver Streak. We see him blasting through rock, but unfortunately he creates too big of a blast, and the rock is too unstable and it's going to fall down and crush him. But because he's extremely fast as well, running nearly 70 miles an hour thanks to mechanical implants, he was able to run away from the collapse. He's got a green-skinned slave master named Slarv who treats him poorly but is also able to threaten him with a shock collar that's placed on all the slaves. Silver Streak runs into Zeus, who was one of the aliens who led the failed rebellion. They got Zeus working at a chef even though he eats rock and hates having to deal with all these animal carcasses that he has to feed to other people. And they talk about some of the other people involved with the rebellion and how they were punished. Like Perrin was the little goblin looking dude, yellow dude, short person, pointy ears. They make him calculate ship courses and things like that. There's a robot looking thing called Carbazil 829 who they're making run garbage disposal from inside the garbage disposal. There's a guy who's just called Leader 4.1 who basically looks like the tall version of Perrin, but he wears a oxygen tank on top of his head. And he's trying to train gremlins essentially in how to do things properly. And then you got Morzy, who is this purplish giant, and they got to work on microchips. Every time he breaks a microchip, he gets electric shock. Basically, what we're establishing is that Rage is a jerk, but also the people who were involved in the rebellion are still active within the community. So then Gogog shows up, and you may remember he's the blue-skinned, 4-armed, 6-nasaled trainer, and he takes over the shock collar on Silver Streak and shocks him until he falls unconscious. The slaver's concerned that it's going to mess with his money that's happening, but he can't go against Gogol either since this guy is basically second, third in command beyond Rage. So they take Silver Streak and they dump him into this lab where he's meant to recover. He wanders around and happens upon Armor, who is stripped down to his skivvies and just in a deep depression over the loss of his hand. Silver Streak basically says, hey bro, get over yourself. He unlocks both of his own hands. Apparently as part of his gaining the ability to shoot the energy blast, they had to amputate his real hands and give him robot Luke Skywalker ones. So yeah, Silver Streak has twice as much amputation as his brother and is tired of his tripping. Eventually Armor goes ahead and gets a hold of his armor again, tries to escape again, is put into conflict with another one of Rage's higher ups, a guy named Sacraman. This is basically a Batman. I mean, he looks like essentially Batman if you took away the costume with the exception of the cape. He's a vampire vampire-looking dude, and he's one of these guys who's so silent and so smooth that Armor throws everything he's got at this dude for an hour until he's gasping for air and he just can't lay a blast on the dude. But from the meeting between Silverstreak and Armor, they're trying to formulate another rebellion, come up with some new plan. They're manipulating Sacraman and Gogol to help them with this. Slowly, contact is made with those other rebel leaders that we discussed earlier. They're all on board for Rebellion 2.0. They meet with Armor, who is the new component to this since he wasn't part of the previous rebellion, and he basically says, look, I've got a plan that we can get out of here, but one of you guys is going to have to die for sure. Now, I can't tell you which one it is. You just got to be willing to, every one of you has to be willing to be the person who's going to die without knowing whether or not you're the one or not. And they add the wrinkle that, okay, we'll do it, but you got to get everybody out. No slave left behind, essentially. Ones who die, of course, get left behind, but you know what I mean. So Armor agrees, and even though Gogol is suspicious of Armor, they're able to find all kinds of clever ways to disguise his communications and sneaking out and stuff like that. And thus ends the Revengers series. Oh wait, no it doesn't. Finally offering the full title of Armor and the Silver Streak, Amazing Heroes Preview Special number 133. This is issue number 133, I should point out. Cover dated January 15th, 1988. In Armor and the Silver Streak number 5 through 8, coming your way in the first half of the year, Armor's plan for the Slave Rebellion and escape has succeeded spectacularly. Rage, the pirate fleet commander, is spitting mad, and rather than continue his flight, he decides to search for the escaped Armor. The duel between the two has become more than personal. Armor and Silver Streak, their ship disabled, have landed on the Crystal Planet, where a living crystal holds sway. Although it can probably get the duo back to Earth, it refuses. Then Rage tracks down Armor, and they battle a second time. A greater battle will come, promises writer Neal Adams. A battle that will fill nearly a whole issue of Armor and Silver Streak. After the battle is done, the boys return to the conundrum of the living crystal, which will help them only if they do something intellectual or physical at its bidding. Naturally, the boys opt for the physical, to their regret. At the end of next year, Armor and Silver Streak will get back to Earth. Rage will be dead. Armor will have a ruby eye. A sun will not go nova. The crystal will tell its story and save 30 billion sentient creatures. Sacraman will give his life for Armor, and life will just begin to get complicated for Armor and Silver Streak. Note that while the writer, inker, and colorist remain the same, Neal Adams, Rudy Nebris, Corey Adams, this series will feature the penciling talents of Tom Grindberg on number 5, Bart Sears on number 6, and Trevor Von Eden on number 7 through 8.
Geez, spoiler much?
Continuity finally commits to a title for this book, Armor and the Silver Streak, beginning with issue number 4. Admittedly, the indicia is just Armor number 4, but encourage them, okay? And so this is an interesting cover, once again by Neal Adams. I believe that they've all been by Neal Adams so far. This one's got Armor with a bow and arrow, and you've got these muskrat-looking dudes, but they got forearms coming out, and they got this little gremlin dude, but more demonic, and they've got this scorpion mantis thing that's around Armor's neck, but looks like it's working with him rather than against him. And then in the background, there's like this sort of abominable snowman dude, but with way longer arms and kind of goofy looking, but also dangerous looking. And then behind them is a whole bunch of ninjas. And let me tell you, this book does not have a single ninja in it. So why? Oh, because it's the mid-80s. That's why. And they get inside, and the alien dudes are basically training Armor in new ways of fighting because he has the potential to be a 10, but he's not a 10, and Rage is a 10. And so if Armor can't get to be a 10, he ain't going to be able to fight off Rage. And so they're trying to get him there. So what they do is they drug him so that he cannot access his prior abilities, and he has to learn brand new abilities based on the aliens we saw on the cover. But that's not really made clear, so you have pages and pages of these various aliens going through a circle of life thing. You also have these hunter guys who are trying to hunt on this planet where these creatures are all supposed to be, and they're just getting wiped out big time. What I thought was especially interesting is there's this big-eared hunter guy that looks just like one of the elves from, I think, the Lobo Paramilitary Christmas special, like to the point where I almost think that Simon Bisley might have swiped from this image of him getting decapitated. And again, I have to emphasize, there are 7 pages of these various animals doing the circle of life thing, showing different ways of which they are able to kill one another. There's also a splash page of Jack in a tank, being set up to see this stuff. And it's only in the last panel that we begin to explain why we've been looking at all this stuff. But it does get the point across. Armor gets his armor back on. He has to fight some people. He immediately starts using the new techniques he's learned. Kind of looks like that one dude from Street Fighter that jumps around like a monkey, but it's all right. We get to spend some more time with some more aliens. There's a really interesting bit where the little yellow genius dude is building an escape ship. It's not really an escape ship because it's too small for everybody to get out, but they need to have a ship to get off, and they're able to do that. And they had enough parts and enough time they could actually build a second ship, and Armor starts screaming at him because, hey, I didn't ask for a second ship. Stick to the plan. And Silver Streak just hauls off and punches his brother and says, "Shut up, you inflated twerp. You're so full of yourself that you stink, Jack." And then there's a panel where all Armor says is a word balloon with an an asterisk in it. And then Jacques continues, "You better get real, kid, and soon. Your ego's way out of whack. I don't know the details of your plan. Nobody does. But an extra emergency escape vehicle on the Forge ship might come in very handy." Silver Streak just keeps pointing out, "Hey, I'm older than you. I will put the hurt on you. I got more power than you. Quit being a jerk." So, hey, kid who wrote that letter, concerned that you were going to get Hawk and Dove again, you got Hawk and Hawk, or Hawk and Falcon, or whatever. Hawk and Eagle is white and blue. Leave me alone. So this is an issue where things really start to get hopping because there's this territorial space, I think it's called the Crystal Empire or something, and this has got Rage just scared, shaking in his boots, because they're in an area where if they run afoul of these particular aliens in this particular sector, these guys are not only really powerful, but they can also send out communications to alert the entire galaxy, "Hey, we got slavers in our area, come and get them," and it's going to mess up his whole thing. So he's super freaked out, and he's arguing with his commanders, "Do what I tell you to do, exactly what I tell you, don't cause any problems. We're going to disperse, and we're going to look as best we can to look like we're just an asteroid field passing through this area. Don't nobody say nothing, don't even sneeze." And meanwhile, Armor's working his way through ship, beating up different alien guys, setting stuff in motion. He runs into Gogol. Gogol appears to have the drop on him, but it turns out this whole time, Armor's been feeling out Gogol and realizing that he's actually helping Armor, that he did that thing to send a Silver Streak to his brother while he was messed up. At the time, Gogol explained it to Rage that he was trying to jumpstart the kid, that basically the guy was in a bad place and he wasn't ever going to become the 10 and ever be valuable if we didn't get him out of his funk. But really it's because he knew if he got the two brothers together, they would start plotting, and he wants to get rid of Rage too. And so ultimately he admits, "Yeah, okay, I'm kind of on your side. I'm going to look for an opportunity and we'll drop the hammer on this sucker." By the way, this is one of the issues where they've got the house ad where it's a pizza box with a cartoon version of Megalith running around with comic books flapping off of a tray like they were a slice of pizza. It's a cute little ad. Continuity had fun ads. There was another ad that's running a bunch of these issues where you got a little kid holding his breath until there's a new Continuity comic in a comic book shop. The point is to say that there aren't enough copies being ordered by the comic shops to satisfy demand, but really it just reminds you that this kid would be dead really quick because these comic books can't come out on time. And then an adult does the same thing as the kid, so that's two fatalities on your conscience. Continuity Comics. Also, all these comic books have ads for Freak Show, the Bernie Wrightson, Bruce Jones graphic novel, which I'm not even sure if this was the first time this came out. I think at some point it was released by Eclipse, and this might have been a re-release of it. But these ads were just all over these books, and given the protracted time frame, you're looking at plugging this book for like a couple or 3 years, which is a thing that happened a lot with these things. Just like most of these comic books have an ad for the Crazyman comic book that's going to come in like 1990. Armor number 5, more of a pinkish logo. Armor with a laser pistol in one hand and a blade at the other. They're both pointed outward. He's dramatically lit from below. Orange tones. He's screaming like a nutcase, saying, "Rage, I'm taking you down. I'm releasing all the slaves. I'm cutting your fleet to ribbons, and I'm going to humiliate you just because you got an ugly face." Also because you got your hand chopped off, your brother got 2 chances chopped off, and you lost years of your life, and you've got all these technological implants you didn't want, but also the ugly face. He's not a handsome alien. Chapter 5, in the amazing origin of the Silver Streak and Armor. This has been the way this has gone for issue after issue. Change in penciler. This one's drawn by Bart Sears. In theory, I looked real close at most of these panels. I'm a fan of Bart Sears. I'm pretty familiar with his work. I got a pretty good idea of what his work looked like in 1988. I cannot see but like little tiny flickers here and there of any semblance of Bart Sears, and it's only because I'm looking for it. This book is drawn by Rudy Nebres. This book has pretty much been drawn by Rudy Nebres going back to issue 2 when he started inking it, but you can still see Tom Grenberg in some stuff. This issue, I think Neal must have just not been into Bart Sears at all, and he told Rudy just go nuts, and he does. This is a Rudy Nebres comic book, and I love Rudy Nebres. I'd have been really cool with seeing Armor and the Silver Streak drawn by Bart Sears, but I can picture that in my mind. I know what that looks like. I don't actually need to see it. Rudy does it better. And another thing that I need to point out with Armor too, if you've ever seen this guy, this dude has a total George Perez design. And by that I mean he's one of those characters that you cannot believe anybody else but a super detailed artist can draw this thing. I can't believe they managed to find artists to draw this dude's suit for more than one issue at a time. It's crazy involved, crazy details, tons of scales, tons of ornate pieces, and just it's a beast to draw. And somehow this is the only costume he's ever had, and they managed to get out a couple of dozen comic books with this dude at least over the course of, admittedly, the better part of a decade. It's just amazing to look at this thing, and also why they didn't simplify this at some point, I can't tell you. So anyway, in the actual story though, everything's getting blown up because the Crystal Warrior guys are supposed to have found the fleet, and they're attacking the fleet, and so there's all this blasting going on, and this ship's getting hit and that ship's getting hit. Nobody knows what they're going to do. They're overwhelmed. Armor's running around, knocking out people, doing all of his ninja type stuff. You got Silver Streak and the little, Mogwai dude, whatever, Yoda. Let's go with Yoda. It's Yoda. Okay, Yoda, but talks normal. Him and Yoda are getting into the ship that they built, and they're running around doing some stuff too, and they're having fun because they know that this is working and they're really into it. Armor goes and finds these great big muscular dudes who are going to help them with the rebellion and turns off their slave collars and stuff. There's a lot of blam, blam, pew, pew, punch, punch, action-packed extravaganza. Oh, hey, another weird repeated house ad is Megalith sitting on gym equipment showing you copies of Samuree, Toy Boy, and Armor statted in. Stay tuned for more of those titles. Dear moms and or dads, since we seem to have a moment of your attention, remember, your kids don't read television, but they do buy and read comic books, which may be the only type of literature they'd purchase with their own money. Shouldn't your kids read quality continuity comics? Good writing, good drawing, highest quality color reproduction, highest quality paper, highest quality high adventure. Search them out. They're worth looking for. You're probably holding one right now. Continuity Comics. Until comics become great literature, we'll do our best to give you and your kids good comic books with decapitations and underage crotch shots. What are you selling, man? I will say this though. I've read some sources online that really attack continuity comics for their coloring, saying that it's too muddy, it's too dark, it ruins the artwork. I can't disagree more. I'm not saying that all the books are perfect, but most of the books look really good. And I remember when I would occasionally buy one of these continuity comic books, being very impressed with the reproduction quality. They were done on like something akin to Baxter paper most of the time. They did have very realistic skin tones. They had a quality of painted coloring. I think that wasn't it mostly Christy Adams they were saying earlier that was coloring these things. They're really good looking books, very distinctive looking. There are other comic book lines that used some of these techniques and they were extremely muddy and made the books really hard to read for me, I can tell you. But with the continuity books, I think they were more realistic. I do think they were darker. I think oftentimes that darkness and that brownness worked for the books because it just suited the material and it suited the art style. The earthier colors just made more sense for a lot of stuff. Like all these aliens that are running around, it'd been very easy for this to get really corny and really tacky very quickly. But because they have sort of a naturalistic quality to the bizarre greens and yellows and reds, you buy it. You believe that these are aliens. They're inexplicably almost all bipedal with brains in the head parts and things like that. But it's a science fantasy. You go with it. It is a grounding quality though in the coloring. So finally, Armor confronts Rage, and for reasons I don't fully understand, he does a Dr. Evil. He reveals the plan. What has actually happened is the one-away ship has been broadcasting false signals to the other ships. The ships have circled, and they're all shooting at one another, thinking that there's crystal ships. There are no crystal ships. The crystal guys don't even know about them yet. It's just the fleet shooting at one another. But in the midst of all this chaos, the slaves have been escaping, and also Armor is going to try to get into a fight with Rage, or not. He kind of runs away in the end. Smart. Didn't go too good for him the last time. Eventually, most of the conspirators are in the first ship, and then Silver Streak and Armor end up in the second ship, and Big Bro is telling Little Bro, aren't you glad that we kept the second ship, you jerk? But doesn't go on very long because Rage screams, die maggot spawn, and fires a missile that seemingly destroys the spare ship with the two brothers inside. To be continued. From Amazing Heroes number 145, the summer 1988 preview special, cover dated July 15th. Armor and Silver Streak. Armor and his brother, the Silver Streak, continue to battle Rage for the freedom as this intergalactic series continues. But Rage is not exactly willing to let them go. Armor must find a way to free all the slaves, and he does, with a plan that could only be pulled off by a 10, and we don't mean Bo Derek. The plan has the added benefit of reducing Rage's fleet to almost nothing. Rage must limp after the escaping slaves before he can challenge Armor to a battle to the death. This battle takes place on the surface of the Crystal Planet, and Rage leaves Armor for dead, but there are still a few surprises left in our hero. Armor number 6 changes things up. This time we have a gold logo that's heavily obscured by Rage and some color holds, which spell out Rage. But you've also got Armor crouching, running at you, again, very Wolverine-esque. I'm not sure why he's running from Rage's crotch at the reader. You would probably figure he'd be going in the other direction, but let's go with it. The bottom color hold promises Bosses Showdown. This one, by the way, April 1989. We're going to lay off making fun of the protracted publishing schedule. The joke's been beaten to death at this point, I'm sure. Pencils in this issue, theoretically by Trevor Von Eaton. Now, again, this is 89, so this would have been in the period where he was transitioning away from his more angular, minimalist, Toth-inspired style, more towards his style in the early 90s, where he got in some more Dick Giordano, and not just because Giordano was doing the inks. Tried to take on some more of the dynamic action look, maybe a little Ron Wilson in there. Doesn't matter. It's still drawn by Rudy Nebret. You see no great variance in the artwork. Ultimately, the inker is the artist of this book, and more power to him. He's doing a great job. So it turns out that the damage to the ship wasn't as bad as they thought, but it did take out their engines. Silver Streak happens to be a person who can manifest energy, so he blasts into the reactor coil, or whatever you want to call it, is able to power the ship long enough to get it into the atmosphere of a nearby planet. But Big Bro's sweating, Little Bro's sweating as he's trying to pilot this thing. They have something of a not quite crash landing, but they do land embedded nose down into some crystal, or maybe it's water. It's a little unclear. Maybe a mix. Rage's men are like, well, so much for that. Let's get out of here. Rage is like, turn the ship around. I'm not letting this go. And they're like, this is folly. And he's like, I'm going to crush your brains into a paste. And so they do what he tells them to do. So the brothers get out of the ship. There's some druid looking dudes with robes. They're like, hey, come on over here. We predicted you guys were going to come. Let me explain to you what you got here. You got this thing. It's called the Library Crystal. And we've been trying to learn from this thing, but it doesn't want to tell us anything. Also, you got some guys coming after you. It's going to be kind of a hassle. But for now, the crystal thing's going to take care of it. And the crystal thing does. Crystal thing turns any bombs that are thrown by Rage's ships into dissolving plasma blibs. And then the crystal thing starts talking to people, and we get the exposition. This crystal, very similar to Metamorphosis Odyssey, if you've ever read Jim Starlin stuff. This crystal is a survivor of another dimension. It was created to be like an AI and have like all the knowledge, like just be a knowledge source for any and all. Things don't go well. There's a black hole involved. The entire universe gets destroyed. The only surviving thing is the crystal. Now the crystal is like, okay, well, I need to learn more stuff, and I want to make sure that never happens again. I won't share any information unless I get brand new information. I already know a whole bunch of stuff. It's like, okay, we got to figure out something to tell this thing so that it can tell us how to stop a sun from exploding that's going to about kill everybody and destroy the crystal and the planet, yada, yada, yada. Rage and Saruman and all these other guys show up, and they're trying to get a direct confrontation. Silver Streak tries to blast him. Armor refuses to let Jacques get involved, actually grabs him by the hands and unscrews his hands off and throws him off the side of this pyramid thing. Really dumb. Just not coming across great in his own book. He looks cool. He acts cool in general, but Silver Streak is kind of the MVP here, to be honest. But also, it must be having something to do with being a 10, because Sacramon wants to, have a hand in all this stuff, and Rage like throws these ball things at him that paralyzes him or stabs him in the hands or some stuff. It's like, okay, we've both messed over our second commands, so the two of us can have a big old fight. Armor starts trying to do his monkey style, but Rage has learned a lot of the same stuff. He's using the same techniques, and he's better at it. He's got more reach. He's got more strength. He pretty well dominates again. It'd be really cool if Rage looked cool, but he kind of looks dopey, so it just diminishes Armor that much more. Plus, they both have one word, one syllable names, and you won't know it because I'm editing this. I keep calling Armor Rage because they're just so samey. But in the end, Rage stabs Armor in the eye with a sword. And the last panel is the image of the creature that Armor was emulating on its back, blood pulling out of its head, plus Armor's helmet on the ground, facing up, sort of looking to the left shoulder of the audience with the sword plunged in the eye hole. To be continued. All right, Armor number 7. This cover features Silver Streak prominently, blasting a bunch of aliens while his brother lays at his feet. Awkward positioning, awkward perspective, not one of the stronger covers, but at least it's an action beat. It's also a wraparound cover, so you get a nicely rendered alien creature Dillamajiggy on the back cover. I don't know that it was really necessary. Not like it's Rage or anything, it's just a weird handly googog. So this one is dated January 1990. Pencils this time are attributed to Brian Apthorpe. Again, no, it's Rudy. It's all Rudy. So before Rage can apply the coup de grace to the now one-eyed Armor, Silver Streak, with his no hands, still managed to blast his brother away because it's not like he needed the artificial hands to use the blasting power. Also, somebody throws some smoke canisters, so that provides them with some cover. Silver Streak is still struggling though because it's hard for him to get anything done without hands, but all of a sudden, some creature reaches out from the green smoke to put the hands back on him and sends him off to go. That's later going to be revealed that's Gogol, the trainer guy who changed sides. Silver Streak does some more blasting, finally makes his way back to a village. Turns turns out that the druid guys have already gotten a hold of Armor and are trying to heal him, but he's pretty messed up. I mean, he just got stabbed in the eye, and we don't know how deep that sword went either. Eventually, they do some kind of weird time thing with the help of Sacraman, who apparently also is on their side. Nobody likes Rage. And so with the sped up time, they're able to get Armor healed enough to go to the crystal computer thingy, but they have to defeat some monster thingies. Because the weird thing with the computer thing, the crystal computer, is that it wants knowledge, but also it likes to see people fight. So it's like one of those two things. Give me a piece of information that I, as an omnipotent intelligence, don't know, or go WWE. Armor is very capable of doing that. So the crystal eventually is all like, wow, you guys really impressed me. You guys have some kind of a future. I think you're going to help us save the entire universe. So the same thing that happened in my universe doesn't happen to y'all's universe. As a gift, I'm going to go ahead and give Silver Streak his hands back. And it's interesting because first it unscrews the artificial hands, and then you see like a blue flame with his skeletal hands in the midst of it. And then you have the flesh start to bleed onto the hands. Then boom, he's got hands. Also, the computer takes away the implants that gave him his super speed and makes those natural. Why that needed to happen, I don't know. But what's very galling to Armor is that the crystal refuses to do the same thing for him. He's like, no, you're gonna have to make do with what you got because it's important for me to see how that works out for you. And Armor's like, that's not cool. You know, brothers, you got to do for me what you do for my brother. This is what a scam. And Crystal's like, look, no, I'm not gonna do that. But here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna shoot a ruby into the socket of your right eye, and you're gonna see through this ruby thing with this cool, weird, jagged scar around it besides. And the issue ends with Armor with his helmet off, yelling, what is it? What? Tell me, Jacques, what's happening to my eye? Next, Duel in the Sun. And guess what, folks? The series does continue. It's not like all these other ones where it's like, oh, wait, that book doesn't come out anymore. There's got a ways yet to it. But guess what? They finally decided to let time catch up. We're not going to see the brothers get off of the Crystal Planet. They did already say that the rude guys, we got a ship. We're going to get you back to Earth. No problems. But we don't actually get to see that happening. We spent 7 issues on this origin, and then you go to issue 8, they're hanging out in New York, and they've already met Megalith. But hey, you haven't met Megalith, so let's get on that. From the Slings and Arrows comic guide, Revengers. The confused consumer should be warned that the first 4 issues of this title have Revengers in very small lettering above a very large Megalith logo. And indeed, the first issue is a Megalith solo comic. Not that this matters overly, though, as the writing rarely rises to the level of competency, and the sole appeal is the art. For 1 through 5, that was provided by Neal Adams, and is probably his best of the 1980s. And even Larry Stroman's work on 6 is quite presentable. The first 2 issues also contain backup. Crazyman in 1, his first appearance, and Shadowhunter in 2, strangely reprinted from Marvel's Bizarre Adventures. Next up is the collector's item issue Revengers, starring the Ultimate Man Megalith. Who are the Revengers? Not gonna find out in this comic. What happens on the first page of the comic? We see a brick wall and thud uttered for panel after panel until the bricks start to come loose from the wall. Then the next page is a big muscular white guy with brown hair in a weightlifter's outfit, having punched his way free. Caption: no human being made of flesh and bone could possibly pound a cinder block wall, reinforced with concrete, with his fists and forearms, and smash through it in moments. Until this day, it would have been considered impossible, but for this 18-year-old youth whose body is trained to its ultimate capacity, to its highest form, that wall crumbles. For this, for all the world to know, is the Ultimate Man, Megalith. Our presumed hero is immediately met by what would appear to be 1940s German soldiers shouting about capturing the Americaner. Megalith tries to explain himself, but they're not interested. They're intent on shackling him from head to foot, so he does a standing leap over the heads of, I think, 5 officers, and then he's met by a half-track. Not having read tons of DC war comics in the 1960s, I didn't know what a half-track was. It's apparently a vehicle that's half truck with rubber wheels and half or more tank with treads. For some reason, the German soldiers have rubber bullets, but the half-track is going to fire real bullets. Megalith has to prioritize disabling this thing, so he rips out a telegraph pole and shoves it under the treads of the half-track and turns it over. over, and there's captions that explain the physics of that. Really not the priority right now. Then a helicopter comes in and starts firing warning shots at Megalith. He runs in an open field, finds a rock that he can jump off of that's just the right angle to send him up high enough in the air to grab onto the helicopter, seize the throat of the pilot, and demand that he be taken to an American base. Actually, he's dropped off in the Black Forest of Germany, and then a kindly German family take him to the base. Sorry, forgot. It takes him 4 hours before he's explained his story to American authorities. The United States Armed Forces lifts Joe Majurek high over the Atlantic, flying him back home. For those keeping count, we're 8 pages into the comic book, and the American military already know more than we do, as between panels, he's explained to them what we, the readers, would probably like to know. But we're finally getting to that. Joe Majurek grew up on a farm, idolizing the likes of Schwarzenegger, Reeves, Columbu, Zane, and Dickerson, equal almost to Pasteur, Ehrlich, Einstein, and Buckminster Fuller. So we're letting you know, trains his body, he trains his mind. We're definitely going to an amazing man, Peter Cannon place with all this. Taking a page from Milo of Cortana, he lifts a calf each day as the calf grows older and older. Supposedly his strength is going to grow with the calf until he can lift a full-grown bull of 1,200 pounds. Despite the vagaries of the timeline, this is more or less a Reagan-era American farm, so of course they're deep in debt, struggling to survive, and most weirdly, they were going to have to dip into vacation money to pay some overdue payments on the farm. Then that vacation money disappears. It's not explained what happened to it, and the bank isn't very lenient about giving them any more extensions. So then this random guy shows up who's supposedly part of an Olympic committee who agrees to pay off the back debt, at least for the few months that they had lapsed. They're going to take young Joe with them to Germany to train him for the Olympics. They're going to pay for him to do that, pay for his room and board. They're also going to give a stipend to the family while this is happening. Family's like, wow, this is really too good to be true. We probably should suspect this. We're not really on the same page with you guys. Joe's like, no, this is what I want. This will be great. It'll be great for the family. It'll be great for me. Let me go do this. So he goes to this training camp in the Black Forest of Germany. Given that you'd assume he'd be training for the United States, it's already kind of a weird situation that would raise a lot of questions. He's cool for the first couple of years. None of his roommates at the place are nice to him or anything, but they do give him a dog. So he spends all his time hanging out with his dog and working out, becoming an Olympic level athlete, or at least in training to become one. He's ripped. He focuses on bodybuilding specifically. He writes letters home, actually visits them a couple of times, but then questions start getting asked. They don't want to let him go home. He's getting letters from home that are redacted. When he tries to demand that, hey, I want out, the guy who had recruited him shoots his dog dead and says, hey, if you keep pushing, we're going to do the same thing to your parents. So Joe spends the next several years rededicating himself to training mind, body, spirit. Without any distractions, he gets to a place that most human beings never reach. Quote, his first goal was a true mental control of his body. Trial and error brought him closer and closer to the mind-body link. Not satisfied, he tried harder. Then one day he achieved the link up. He's Doc Savage. He's a guy who can be both a physical dynamo of superhuman proportions as well as a mental giant on paper, in theory. He appears in continuity comic stories. Don't bet on it. One way he shows his superiority is that in order to help his family through their financial problems, he starts studying investing. There's even some stats of magazine covers like Harper's, Fortune, Forbes, figures out how the stock market works and gives his family investment advice so that they can accrue a fortune in his absence. Finally, the Russians show up and he's essentially going to be sold into servitude to the Russian Olympic team. This whole scheme is apparently they spend years and years developing the best of the best athletes to then sell them to countries as ringers. You got to admit, you haven't heard that origin story before. This is when Joe decides he's going to finally act up and start throwing his weight around. The Russians are like, hey, we didn't know we were buying you as though you were human chattel. Sorry about that. Don't let us get in your way. And then we're back to the beginning of the story where he punches through cinder block. But then we're also back to the beginning of the flashback where he's in the United States and he now has a buddy who's a military captain that's helping him navigate being back in country. He takes a helicopter to his family farm. There's a couple of limos out front. People are referred to as terrorists. I assume that these are the people who are from the Olympic Gaming Committee, or like gaming is in like rigging, not gaming is in the actual committee. They apparently are there to get Megalith's parents. Oh, by the way, I should point out that all of a sudden he is in full costume. It's a blue and white number with stylized M's on the chest and belt, and he's got metal bracelets. No explanation is given for why he's wearing this particular outfit, his superhero outfit for the rest of his career. It's also funny that he has time to get outfitted, but there's not time to go and save his parents. His parents aren't dead, they're missing, but the terrorists / opportunists are there. He gets fight a bunch of them. He gets shot in the chest. he has such muscle density that he's able to basically spit the bullets back out of his muscles with a minimum of bleeding. They do say that he's bleeding like a stuck pig, but we only see a few dribbles on his white pants. They've taken out the terrorist guys. The captain dude that he's going to be friends with apparently points out that, hey, you're rich, kid, but he's not consoled. He wants to find his family. He's freaking out. So the captain dude slaps him. Again, this is a person who is shrugged off, bullet to the chest, but he gets slapped in the face, pauses, and then spends a full splash page screaming, "Arr!" And there's even blood dripping from the edges of the splash, which is more blood than we see on Megalith's outfit after he's been shot. And that's how the story ends. But again, we've got a backup. We're going to be introduced to another new character. There's a hostage situation. I think it's at a foreign bank. The CIA agents or whatever, none of them wants to go in because they know the terrorists are going to kill whoever goes in. This pale, blonde-haired guy named Brody, longish haired, by the way, for what he's supposed to be able to do. He volunteers. Everybody's like, you're nuts. And who the hell are you anyway? What are you even doing here? He's like, no, it's okay. I'm going to go in. He's manhandled by the terrorists. They beat him up. He's bleeding. He's like, you really shouldn't be doing this. I said you really shouldn't be doing this. It's not a wise plan of action. And essentially, after beating the guy up a little bit, he goes nuts. And that's when we're introduced to Crazyman with, I don't even want to get into the logo they've got for this guy, but he wigs out and with his bare hands, he's ripping people's hearts out. Way more blood in this story than the other story. He kills all the terrorists with his bare hands and then goes back to being Emo Williams. You would better get me to a hospital. I think I'm gonna throw up. Neal Adams talks about the character creation in his back issue interview, points out that he was having a session. This is a clean show. He's talking up his fellow creators and they're playing around with different superhero names like Mailman, Postman. Somebody comes up with Crazyman. I don't know if it was him or not. The idea is dismissed. What a dumb idea, because somebody's actually like, Crazyman, there's something to that. They're like, no, this is a dumb idea. Neal takes that. He does the plate for the portfolio in 1979, and now we see him appearing in stories. This is also one of those instances where John Morris makes a lot of fun of the book for its less than sensitive portrayal of neurodivergent individuals. These are comic books that use the full R word, if you know what I mean. Not to mention the Latino racial epithet from Skate Man. So sensitivity to people with psychological challenges is way too much to expect from Continuity Studios. The politics may be vaguely lefty, particularly with the environmentalism. Definitely, these are not PC comic books.
God bless all policemen and fighters of crime. May thieves go to jail for a very long time. They've had a hard day helping clean up the town. Now they hang from the mantelpiece both upside down. A glass of warm blood and then straight up the stairs. Batman and Robin are saying the prayers.
God bless Superman and Superwoman, Aquaman and Aquawoman, Iron Man and Iron Woman, Spider-Man and Spider-Woman, Plastic Man and Plastic Woman, Crazyman and Batman.
From the Slings and Arrows comic guide, Crazyman. Typical for a continuity production, Crazyman mixed decent artwork with absolutely unintelligible writing, in this case applied to one of comics' most repellent characters. Despite principal artist Dan Barry's best effort, the title is more likely to be remembered for the stupid gimmick of the second series premiere. Yes, each and every one of the pages is cut in the shape of Crazyman's head. Under no circumstances should this be considered a recommendation, however. The January 15, 1989 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 157 offers a blurb for Crazyman, written by Wiz Buckley, penciled by Will Younkins, inked by Neal Adams and Romeo Tengal. Crazyman number 1 starts off in the middle of a mystery and a few months before the 8-page story in the back of Megalith number 1. Crazyman, or Danny Brody, is a man who can't hold a job, make any money, and has no friends or family to help him. His craziness is the reason for all of this. All of his emotions are acted upon to the extreme. There's no middle ground for Crazyman, says Neal Adams about the character. He swings from one extreme to another on the littlest thing. He weeps uncontrollably at a sad movie. He would attack someone who bumped into him in the subway, that kind of thing. Now imagine if a super secret spy organization got a hold of him and sent him into dangerous parts of the world. They sent him on missions that only a crazy man could accomplish. The first 2 issues follow Danny Brody across the globe to the sweltering heat of Africa and a small country ruled by a vicious dictator. Crazyman has to stop the dictator, but his emotions get in the way. Forgive the syntax, this is a direct quote. Accompanying him is the beautiful daughter of the spy agency who is fully convinced that Crazyman is a danger to all those around him. And that's exactly exactly what Crazyman is. He can't control himself, says Adams. The only thing wrong with him is that he's crazy. Neal Adams was clearly very, very positive about the prospects of Crazyman. For seemingly years, there was a teaser where the Crazyman character isn't identified, if I recall correctly, and you just see him slashing through white paper, recalling the movie poster to The Howling, taunting readers with what was to come. Eventually, you did have a full-page image depicting Crazyman, who, again, seems like they were trying to cast him as sort of the Joker as a heroic character. There was also another house ad, showed him from the backside, saying the only thing wrong with whatever the character's name is, Brody, is that he's very, very crazy. But it did seem to take forever before we actually got the Crazyman book. When it did come out, it was a $3.95, I believe, extra-length edition. It was released with an April 1992 cover date. Pencils, Will Youngcunt. Story, Tim Ryan. Lettering, John Costanza. Color, Joe Chido. Inks, Neal Adams, Romeo Tangal, with an assist from Daryl Goza. So the story opens up with some armed thugs who are concerned about a Dr. Will Acker. They're killing people looking for information on this guy. When they're pursued by police, they hop into a car and start smashing up other vehicles. Meanwhile, there's a long, blonde-haired, homeless kid who's wandering the street. We get one of the classic runaway baby in a carriage sequences, going to get run over by the car driven by the two bad guys. Homeless guy goes stark raving, slavering at the mouth, mad, pushes the baby cart out of the way, jumps onto the speeding car with his inhuman Crazyman strength, pulls one guy completely out of the car, rips the roof off the car, chokes a guy to death, is finally surrounded by police, tosses them around a little bit too before he finally calms down, gets taken into jail. He's visited by Dr. Will Acker. It explains that my autonomic functions and metabolism overreact to any outside stimulus. It's like there's an override in my brain and body that takes over whenever it wants. Something to do with a biochemical imbalance. That's what all the doctors said anyway. Had it ever since I can remember. Can you imagine what a nightmare growing up was? Sometimes I get violent like today. Other times I can't feel anything. There are times when other emotions run totally wild, or I lose control of my arms, legs, even my heartbeat. Dr. Acker bails the kid, Daniel Brody, out of jail, which is a little tricky given that he apparently murdered that one guy, maybe more. But this dude's got some sort of pull. He's some sort of government spook. He also has a daughter that's missing in some African banana republic run by the notorious Big Dada. So he's given a cover of Danny Field, inspector for the SES, Save Endangered Species, dropped off in Africa, picked up by Big Dada, finds his way to Miss Christine Ackerson, who apparently is in deep cover. Brody uncovers a canister of poison. He recognizes it as something that he had encountered at state hospitals in the past, jumps out of a flying helicopter, lands in a village, starts screaming at people that it's poison, it's poison. He's eventually calmed down by Big Dada, who explains, hey, I'm not poisoning anybody, calm down. They go back to the guy's base. They see all these emaciated people, children, naked, bloated bellies, the kind of stuff we saw a lot of back in the 80s. We see armed militants burning down the village that Daniel Brody was in earlier. While in the midst of going into the attack, he accidentally gouges the eye out of the doctor's daughter. She's pretty upset about losing her right eye, but they continue on with the mission. Eventually, they're back at Big Dada's base. Big Dada has a press conference where he talks about how he's going to send a bunch of his political prisoners to work in camps. Crazyman uses his crazy person strength to rip open bars of the cells that's holding the political prisoners. They riot. Eventually, he gets a hold of not Pol Pot and tosses him to the prisoners who presumably murder him rather violently. And the story ends with a classic Joker shot, him screaming, laughing into the camera, lots of ya-ha-ha-ha-has, and the one-eyed daughter freaked out about it. Later on, she's back in the States. She's really upset about having to work with this guy. Dr. Acker is like, Christine, I'm sorry, but hey, look, our tech division has got a replacement eye for you with a built-in camera. Obviously, there's some estrangement there. Dr. Acker is actually crying over what happened in the end. Then we move on to a second backup story where we get to see that the camera eye can see apparently heat signatures and x-rays. I don't think that projecting x-rays from that close to your brain is probably a good idea. Stories by Wiz Buckley, penciled by Will Youngcunt, inked by Neal Adams. Stories called In the Dreamtime. Daniel Brody and Christine are attacked by lightly armed men. I mean, one of them has a gun. Another one has, I guess, an automatic knockout dart projector. And then there's also clubs and crowbars and such. Brody is kidnapped. His spy buddies have to go and try to find him. He has flashbacks to time spent in an asylum, being attacked by gigantic insects. He's put put through some sort of a boot camp. He's eventually rescued by his spy buddies, and we're left with a clue, 2 triangles stacked at the points, 1 triangle white, 1 triangle red. That's the sign of the Samuree, Dr. Morturi. I've been searching for him all these years, and now he's found me. To be continued, of course. Second issue, dated May 1992. Art is by Tristan Shane. Look very different than the previous issue. I think Shane is probably best known as a painter, very much more of a, I don't want to say Vertigo style artwork. It actually reminds me more of the kind of stuff you saw at Epic, particularly on stuff like Hellraiser. The horror vibe is definitely more in tune with what you'd expect from a book like this. I doubt that the handling of mental illness is any better in this issue than in the previous one, but I guess because of the grounding effect of the artwork, it feels like it's being taken more seriously. And once again, third world countries, paramilitary operations. Twist on this one is that it appears that Daniel Brody appears to have been killed and buried, but it turns out he's still alive, digs his way out, kills a bunch of people. Into issue number 2. The third and final issue of this volume is from July of 1992. Story by Peter Stone, art by Dan Barry, and it revolves around Daniel Brody encountering terrorist bank robbers. Amazing Heroes preview special. As for Megalith, it was meant to be penciled by Iota Suotichi. Quote, "He's just a growing boy." That is the catchphrase used to describe Megalith, the hero who serves as the cornerstone for the budding continuity universe. In some ways a descendant of such pulp characters as Doc Savage, Megalith is not a superhero in the standard sense. Rather, he is a self-made man who, through years of intense training, has developed both his mind and body to their ultimate potential. He is therefore equally comfortable in the gym and in the stock exchange. The second issue, which is scheduled to sport a wraparound cover illustrated by Neal Adams, sends Megalith to Canada in search of his mother and father. There he will encounter aliens from outer space. He will also meet Armor and Silverstreak, just returned to Earth after the adventure in their miniseries. The 3 heroes, realizing that they have all been orphaned in a sense, will band together in a loosely knit group called the Revengers, which also serves as the subtitle for this book. The following issue will see the team face its first supervillain. In issue number 4, the heroes will begin to build their headquarters retreat somewhere in the American West. Beginning in issue number 5, new characters will be introduced who are also slated to join the Revengers. So what was told to Amazing Heroes wasn't entirely accurate. What happens is Megalith has been back in the States for a few weeks. He's trying to find leads on his missing parents. Captain Carson is helping him. One of the leads is his aunt and uncle, actually. They lived in Canada, specifically the town that was attacked in the Armor series. So very curiously, Megalith happens to have a reasonably close connection to Armor and the Silver Streak. But obviously several years have passed since the attack on West Emery. In that time period, the military has put up a nuclear plant. What's curious is that it appears the nuclear plant is being guarded by the American Army. You would think that that'd be a Canadian thing, but I understand that when it comes to nuclear matters, we actually have a cooperative effort with Canadians, something to do with NORAD. Megalith, of course, wants to go to the site, check on his aunt's house, see if he can catch the leads. The guard is not very accommodating. Megalith loses patience, shatters the guard's rifle, busts through a barricade, goes to town. A call is placed to a muckety-muck at the nuclear plant, but he says, so long as you don't get too close to the plant, we don't really care. Unfortunately for Megalith, the area has its own natural defenders. There are these rock monsters that are roaming around. Megalith gets knocked out by one, wakes up his uncle Radovan's room. He's greeted by his mother, and she explains what's happened. "The whole town was decimated. I wandered through the pitted, empty streets, stunned. Expecting the worst, I made my way to your uncle's house. There it was, untouched. I could scarcely believe my eyes. Totally untouched, as you see it now. I entered the house. It was empty. Then outside I saw them. Those horrible creatures. They lived like trees. They approached the house. That's when I started to telephone the police, the army, navy, and coast guard, anybody. The police and army came. They tried to fight the things. Then for some reason, they gave up. The army and police pulled back and left me trapped. They've been out there for months now. They haven't let me out, and no one's come for me." Not even Dad? "No, only the grocery boy. They seem to want to keep me alive." Well, Megalith's gonna make sure he gets his mama out. They had a house ad that featured part of the wraparound cover and the very curious, not particularly commercially inviting line, "Yeah, you've got my mother. Very big mistake." Those 2 dialogue balloons have 6 ellipses, just worth noting. Now, again, the ad was a trim, and I think it had a white background, so you couldn't see the whole image. When you see the entire wraparound image, it includes Megalith's mom, the rock monsters, Silverstreak hanging unconscious from one of Megalith's hands, and as he's pointing, Armor is backing away, hands up, not wanting trouble seemingly. A very non-Armor pose, really. Well, as previously mentioned, there was another tagline, and this is where he says the thing. "Fix a couple of sandwiches for me, Mom. I'm a growing boy. Hey guys, I'm coming out to play. You guys all look alike, and before we play again, I'm going to give you an official nickname. All of you. Sandy. Sandy Breakstone. Hi, Sandy. Breakstone. Yeah, Spider-Man isn't going on the unemployment line anytime soon with that dialogue. So Megalith proceeds to fight the rock monsters. Elements of the military and the muckety-muck at the nuclear site keep an eye on things. A jet eventually is sent out. But then comes, spaceship? What's next? Half a block long. The ship gently floats to the ground in a relatively clear area. Yards before settling, landing legs extrude smoothly. Joe's Sandy Breakstones turn strangely toward the ship and begin murmuring a chant. From the ship emerges Armor, speaking in some alien tongue.
Back off, muscles, unless you want trouble.
Armor considers the rocky people to be relatively helpless mivtrooms, the looks of it. I mean, in print, it looks like mushrooms. Armor's got moves, but he can't really do a lot to Megalith. The guy's just too powerful. Silverstreak can do a little bit more. He gives him a pretty good blast.
Now you just lie there, big guy, and we'll straighten all this out with no fuss.
That does a dirtbag. We're going to straighten this out all right, with the worst damn fuss you ever saw. So first, Megalith starts picking up pebbles from the ground and flinging them pretty much like bullets at poor Silverstreak. You wouldn't think it'd be a problem with the super speed, but I think the writers may have forgotten that particular power. It's announced on the cover that this is the introduction of Armor and Silverstreak. I don't know for sure whether or not the first issue of Armor had come out by this point, so no telling which is the actual first appearance. The rock monsters try to help out Armor and Silverstreak. Megalith is trying to knock them back, and then this other giant, winged, slightly reptilian thing comes out, hissing, "If I meet another, oy vey." It is a splash page. It's not the best, and sadly, they actually turned that into another one of the house ads. Nothing brings the kids to the yard like a giant shouting, "Oy vey." Although I do think this is a good time to point out that it's pretty clear that Megalith was supposed to be the major guy for this line. They're Captain America or what have you. Honestly, I see a lot of Dynamo from the Thunder Agents in Megalith. Brown hair, big guys, blue and white costumes, the most prominent hero in their line. If you look at the first cover to Revengers featuring Megalith, I wouldn't go so far as to call it iconic. It's really not. I don't know that it's ever been swiped, but it is memorable-ish. If you have an interest in continuity comics, this is probably one of the covers that comes to mind because it's a nice pinup shot of Megalith inviting, letting you know, hey, this is my debut, come pick my stuff up. And they talk about how they wanted the characters to be based on real people. There was an interview with Peter Stone that I read not so long ago where he talks about that. I get the impression that Megalith was supposed to be Neal Adams' proxy, the oy vey alluding to his Jewish heritage. I believe that Armor is supposed to be one of his sons, probably Silverstreak, the other son. Hopefully he didn't know a Danny Brody. So I don't know if Neal couldn't get as excited for Megalith or if he couldn't get other people as excited. Maybe his boy's inherent qualities were more appealing to the kids of the 80s, but Megalith just didn't catch on the way that the other guys did. I would say that even though they produced about as many Megalith comics as they did any other series, I just don't see them as often. They're not in the back issue bins as much. I don't have any sales numbers. I'll try to see if I can find something, but I just don't get the impression that he was ever quite up there. So I guess in that way, he was a lot like a number of 80s heroes where the more classical type characters, the straighter characters weren't performing as well as the cool anti-heroes and such. Anyhow, Armor and Silverstreak aren't nearly as protective of the giant reptilian creature with the claws as they are the Mudmen. So suddenly the guys who were fighting are now teaming up to stop this creature. Gee, I guess it's incredibly convenient that all these guys happen to convene on the same area at the same time, given that we know that Armor and Silverstreak have been in outer space for years of their lives. Megalith has been in Germany training for years of his life, and they just all happen to show up in the same place at the same time. And, you know, they're all some way tied to Canada, even though, again, wrong military floating around this joint. So, Fighting McFightingstein. Eventually, Megalith runs into his mom again, but it's pointed out that that ain't your mother. That's a shaper. And sure enough, it turns out that she is another one of the reptilian monsters who apparently can breathe fire or energy blasts out of the mouth. I'm not sure. It's not your mom, you big jerk. It's a shaper. And if I don't get some help soon, I'm in big trouble. I've only got so much to spare.
Shut your yap.
Armor gives the creature a few good whacks. They call to Megalith. They could probably use his help. He just can't bring himself to punch out the giant flying Q serpent that looked like his mom at one point in time. Eventually, the rock monsters explain that after the town was destroyed by the slavers, word reached the Galactic Arm, a local confederation of planets that have ensured the safety of the planet Earth. The Breakstone creatures and the Shaper were sent to the Earth to investigate. The Shaper went AWOL, became fascinated with humanity. We see images of Lionel Lionel Richie, the Ayatollah Khomeini, Ronald Reagan. I'm thinking maybe Brooke Shields, but the female likeness isn't as strong, so I'm not 100% on that. Eyebrows seem to be a bit of a giveaway, though. And so the Shaper became a drug addict on human emotion and human identities, and so the Breakstones had to hang out on Earth and contain the Shaper, make sure it didn't get away from the area. They were aided, of course, by the local military, and so there'd been a cellmate up to this point, but thankfully, there just happens to be a handy spaceship now. Everybody loads up and blasts off. With that out of the way, the military comes to arrest Three-O. And that's when the unfinished, partial color reprint of the old Shadowhunter story from Marvel's, I believe, Bizarre Adventures magazine comes into play. I'm assuming it filled a bit of space until Legal got done with them. In 86's Amazing Heroes Preview Special number 2, thanks to their protracted shipping schedule, these Amazing Heroes Preview Specials actually do a pretty decent job of synopsizing individual issues of the continuity books. Of Megalith number 3, it'll pick up right where issue number 2 ended. Armor and Silver Streak have now joined forces with Megalith. The three of them stumble upon a bombed-out ghost town in the wilds of Canada. Unbeknownst to them, the Canadian army has surrounded the site, which has been the target of an alien attack. In the midst of this confusion, a new player enters the game. His name is Captain Law, and is a Vietnam veteran who has now turned to vigilantism. Armed with a variety of weapons, he considers himself to be the arbiter of justice everywhere, a belief that doesn't exactly endear him to the Canadian authorities. Needless to say, our three heroes escape the clutches of both the military and Captain Law. Issue number 4 sees Megalith entering his local bank to close the deal on a parcel of land he had purchased and on which he intends to build his headquarters. The transaction is interrupted by the sudden appearance of a demon who burns the legal paperwork before disappearing. Meanwhile, Armor and Silver Streak wander into yet another bizarre town. This one is inhabited solely by misfits, people who are deformed or otherwise handicapped. The leader of the town is a man known as the Nuclear Warlock, a Mephistophelian character who has been altered by a nuclear power plant accident. Issue number 5 is still in the plotting stage, but it will probably introduce 2 new characters, Samuree, a female samurai, and Scarlet Streak, Armor and Silver Streak's sister. The Zero Patrol, whose own book has been canceled, will most likely appear in a backup feature in future issues of Megalith. So this is one of the things that's so incredibly frustrating about continuity comics and their interactions with Amazing Heroes. You've already noticed this in prior recap. Somebody gets on the phone with somebody at Amazing Heroes and just starts rattling off their plans for the next few issues of the book. Typically, that's what would happen. Amazing Heroes would talk to somebody at one of the companies. They would tell them what was happening in the books in that time period when they're being interviewed, and then the next few issues. And that wouldn't be such a big deal because it would be an overview and it would just be of stuff that's coming out over the next few months. But I just gave you information that's leading up to Revengers issue number 5, which isn't going to be released until March of 1989 based on the indicia. The Amazing Heroes is from 86. They gave you 3 years worth of this book's plots in a preview special. You're waiting months and years for them to reach a point that's referenced in a paragraph of copy. It's just like, what? So as with the majority of continuities comics in the 80s, another cover by Neal Adams for Revengers number 3. Heavily detailed. It's a nice looking cover, even though what it's depicting is sort of dumb. You've got Megalith standing with legs askew in the palm of a giant mustachioed fascistic figure saying, "You're mine, lawbreaker. No one escapes from Captain Law." And the Captain Law part, of course, is a quasi logo, curiously lacking the TMs that we've come to expect from the indicia. Obviously, this is an American parody of Judge Dredd. Helmet, visor, authoritarianism. It's really blatant. By the way, inside front cover, another ad for Freak Show by Bernie Wrightson and Bruce Jones. I did the research since the last time we brought this up. It was originally serialized in Heavy Metal magazine, I believe in full color. There was a German edition released around 1983. Continuity spent the entirety of the 80s promising to put out their own version. It never happened. There was also no edition ever released in the 90s. Finally, Desperado Publishing, which I believe was a Joe Pruitt thing, they were producing under the Image banner. They put the book out in black and white on crummy paper. They even did a hardcover version of this material in black and white. Why would you want to see this in black and white when it's in glorious color? It was originally produced for Heavy Metal magazine. And amazingly, shockingly, especially as Bernie Wrightson has passed away in recent years, still has not been collected in an American edition from what I can tell. I did toss through some of the pages in black and white. I didn't want to spoil the story for myself because this is one I always wanted to read. It looks like a pretty interesting story, but I'm not going to read it unless I can get it in color. So it's going to be Heavy Metal back issues, or hey, IDW, you just lost Transformers and G.I. Joe and a bunch of other stuff. How about looking into this book as a reprint edition? Anyway, November 1986's The Revengers trademark featuring Megalith trademark number 3 opens up on Captain Law, again, sans trademark. Somehow, despite just being a Vietnam veteran, he has the resources to have camouflaged hovercraft that he uses against, I think, drug dealers or something. His combat goes on for about 6 pages. Ultimately, the ship's sunk and the bad guys are left to sharks. Then we're back to Canada, where it's noted the alien invaders destroyed a small town nearly a year ago. So apparently everything in Armor and Silver Streak occurred within a year's time span. I did not get that impression. These boys hit some pretty serious maturity. I wanted to say they were around 14, 15 when they were picked up. I think it's pretty clear they've got to be closer to 17, 18 now, but whatever. So Captain Carson has made contact with General Fox. He's going to help straighten out the situation of all these superheroes showing up in a restricted area. The military wants everybody to peacefully surrender, particularly the two guys that they think are aliens, but Silver Streak actually starts blasting at them. Megalith's like, what are you guys, crazy? What are you doing? It's explained that, look, we've got a whole bunch of stuff we brought with us. We unloaded it from our ship. This is some cool alien machinery. No Earth Army can get their hands on this stuff. This is ours, and we'll have to fight for it if it comes to that. Demonstrating his naivete, Megalith is like, well, why don't you just surrender and tell them not to open your packages? You hear that?
You don't know much about the military, mind, kiddo. Who's gonna stop them from opening the crates? Your big stupid grin?
By the way, in reading these comic books, they lean into the Canadianness of our two characters. At one point, Armor calls somebody a hoser. I'm doing my best stereotypical, semi-offensive French-Canadian accent just to help differentiate. I was getting tired of the Logan-ish thing that I was doing earlier. The army tries to move in. They're easily brushed off by the heroes, particularly Megalith, throwing rocks at them and such. That's when Captain Law shows up, and he explains,
I'm Captain Law. My jurisdiction is all extra-national law. Aliens are extra-national. My men and I have been monitoring your closed-circuit radio. Your handling of the situation is inefficient and sloppy. Captain Law takes no orders. Captain Law gives orders. Captain Law is the law. And the law says aliens will be executed on sight, and you are too incompetent and unfit to carry out this law. And incompetence is beneath the contempt of law. The punishment for incompetence is death.
And so Captain Law literally blows away poor General Fox. Sorry I bothered to identify him by name because he's not going to be a thing anymore. Captain Law insists on the soldiers bucking up and getting in there and digging in. Given that they've had rocks and lasers blasted at them, they're surprisingly hesitant to move in on the teenagers. Captain Law has no such compunctions. Eventually, our heroes manage to capture one of his men and put a sort of alien truth helmet on him. That's when they find out the backstory of Captain Law. He used to be a border guard. It's implied that he had a deep hatred for brown-skinned people who we see getting battered by him in one of his local jails. Yep, old Brian Farnham, he sure lets him know he hates them. So at one point, the dude basically just straight up pulls a massacre. He says that he was shooting some guys who deserved it. They were smugglers or something, but there was still a hearing. He was forced to resign. That way he wouldn't face any criminal charges. So apparently Brian got together a bunch of other scumbag, racist border cops to join him in raiding an abandoned depot. It was apparently filled with experimental weaponry, prototypes of top secrets, weapons not yet finalized, weird weapons that the army didn't trust, piles and piles of incredible weaponry. Well, it was something the three of us had talked about for a long time, since Nam. We were in Nam together. We figured the world needed an independent police force, a police force that answered to no politicians. We would be that police force. And so again, randomly, they dressed up like a British parody of futuristic trigger-happy cop. Lots of stars. Ultimately, it turns out that in order to continue to finance the operation, they essentially become gun runners, selling arms to non-communist countries to fight communism. It is funny too, because in this book, Armor is written as way more of a smart butt than he is in his own title. He's way more snarky. He contrasts better against his brother and all the other characters. This was an issue that was written by Neal Adams, who also penciled it, with inking by Nestor Redondo, Ian Aiken, Brian Garvey. So it's a good looking book. I will say that he's not as good at drawing Armor as Rudy Nebres, but I think he's a little bit better at writing it than whoever they had scripting some of those issues. Eventually, regardless of the peril they're putting their comrade into, Captain Law's people attack. They get blinded with a flare set up by Armor. They still manage to give chase. Those aliens mustn't escape to rape our women and warp our children. I'm turning my control of my ship over to you till my eyes clear up. So they try to shoot at the cargo being drawn by the little put together spacecraft that they've got. It's not like it's a little like towing craft. They don't have weapons that can fire back at these guys, but Armor manages to whip the packages around and smack the ships. That isn't quite enough to shake off Captain Law, so Megalith has to run back there, jump on his hovercraft, give him a good pop, let him know, Mister, you're a disgrace to that uniform. Whatever that uniform is, you're scum. Everything you do stinks. You don't represent any kind of law. Your pals stink. Your attitude stinks. Your stolen equipment stinks. You're a wacko. And basically just pounds the heck out of Captain Law until he doesn't get up anymore and his ship's a wreck. Armor and the Silver Streak pass by to pick up their buddy, and they all head for upstate New York. Because even as you're buying comics from the company that doesn't quite self-aggrandize, but you know they're the other comics company. I guess guess that was their attempt to be the Uncola. They still got to go to upstate New York like every other stinking superhero. So anyway, in the midst of all this stuff going on, the three have formed a sort of camaraderie. Just so happens Megalith is loaded. Our brothers have been off world for a while and they were teenagers. They've never made any money. So it's like, hey, we don't have any money. Well, we can work for you and we can earn some kind of pay and we can help you build like a base or something up here if you want to do superhero type stuff. And he's like, yeah, cool. Now we can move on to the Revengers featuring Megalith number 4, dated March 1988. It's noted that Joe Majuric's next birthday will be his 18th, so he's not quite legal yet. He goes to the bank for some reason dressed like McCloud, got a cowboy hat, fur-lined coat, boots. They note that he stands 6 foot 4 1/2 inches tall, not a giant but respectable. So in case we end up doing the official handbook of the continuity universe, keep that in mind for your stats. By the way, this issue once again written by Neal Adams with additional dialogue by Elliot Maggin, layouts by Lewis Williams, penciling by Neal Adams, inking by Ian Aiken and Brian Garvey, lettering by Gaspar Saladino, and color by Liz Berube. As mentioned in the Amazing Heroes copy, Megalith is trying to sign his ownership of the property where they're going to build the Revengers base or what have you. They don't actually use the term Revengers so far in the context of the book itself. It's just the title of the book. Demonic creature shows up. The 58-year-old banker Fred Robinson throws a pitcher of water at the demon. Even though he was too hot to be touched by Megalith, for some reason contact with the water makes it melt like the Wicked Witch of the West, which is referenced. They make a bigger deal of it in the copy than it really is because they've got one of these newfangled computers. They can print out 100 deeds if they want to. As long as one of them gets signed, it's A-okay. Jarringly, there's an extended advertising section after the 4th page of the story. We get the pizza ad, we get the 2-page spread of available back issues, including the run of Echoes of Future Past, first couple of issues of Megalith, which may be the reason why that first cover is memorable for me, because I picked up enough continuity comics that had those specific issues advertised over and over again that I probably had a lot of exposure to that image. The first 2 issues of Zero Patrol, the first issue of Armor number 1, The Art of Neal Adams, 2nd edition, various Neal Adams portfolio sets involving characters like Tarzan and I think Conan maybe at some point in there, an Esteban Moroto portfolio, a Rick Bryant one, and movie posters for Grizzly, Eagle Shadow, The Mystery of Chess Boxing, The Play Warp, and Battle or whatever that is. And aside, since the previous episode, Neal Adams passed away. It happened to be the same day as the start of the Texas Frightmare weekend. I was shopping and at one of the tables, I want to say it was for Arrow Video, but maybe it was one of the other distributors. They had a copy of Grizzly on the table. I thought that the guy who was at the booth was being a bit pedantic, so I decided to be pedantic as well and point out, hey, you know that DVD you got there, that Blu-ray you got there, Grizzly? The guy who drew that? He died today. And then to the right of me, there was a guy who's like, Neal Adams died? I'll go into more detail of that later in the podcast series, I'm sure. After that extended ad section, we get the letters column, which is dubbed Revengers Rostrum, which is a real reach. Also, they do the unfortunate, very Charlton thing of printing the letters in typeface. Somebody probably just put this thing onto a typewriter and painful in the eyes. Very, very retro. Some answers to questions. They do intend to bring back Miss Mystic at some point in the near future, including reissues of the earlier issues, but they're not quite there yet. People are asking about whether or not Crazyman was going to join the Revengers. They're told no, that's not the case. That he will have some stories in Echo Future Past, which I don't believe happens because I'm not sure if they produce any more issues at this point. People seem to be really excited about Megalith and really enjoying that first adventure, that first origin story. And again, they had not yet seen the 2nd issue, so they didn't know that Armor and Silver Streak were coming, but people were asking for them. Speaking of those two, they are back on the site of the intended base. I don't know if base is necessarily the right word though, because I don't know where any of these guys are living. Maybe they're just trying to find a place where people aren't going to mess with them all the time. Again, I point out Jack and Jacques are spending way more time together under normal circumstances in this book than they were in their own book. The tone is much lighter between those two. At one point, Jack takes exception to Jacques using his energy powers to blast something too close to the heavy equipment he's operating and says,
You power junkie bird brain, you almost knocked my head off. That's why they need professionals to dynamite, not amateurs. Since you're such a hot shot, you can clear the rest of the land with your bad breath. I'm having lunch.
Don't get so bent, Jack. I was trained by the best. There's no chance you would have been hurt, except maybe in the ego. Hey, Jack, save some of that food. They end up talking about the loss of their hometown, their missing parents. Jacques is very happy that they met Joe Majuric and that he's helping them to build a new life here on Earth. Jack, of course, is more dismissive of that. It's just nice. We're actually getting to see some character stuff here that we hadn't gotten to see in the other continuity books we've been reading so far.
Hey, I like Joe. I really do. He's in the same kind of situation we are.
But then suddenly the pair are attacked by these emaciated zombie/vampire looking things, mutated, creepy looking dudes. As they get punch pieces break off of him. It's pretty gross, according to Armor. By the way, when he's in plain clothes, he still has this big gauntlet on his right wrist from where the artificial hands start. He also wears an eye patch, probably to keep people from noticing that he sees via a ruby. Still hasn't been very well explained how that works. We flash back to the banker's office, and he explains that the property that Joe's buying isn't as isolated as he thinks, that he has neighbors. The first thing this community did was to block off the one road on their side of the mountain. They enforce their privacy quite rigorously. No one has gone into the community for about 2 years. Joseph, they came with an old Indian deed and made it good in court. Since then, we've heard nearly nothing from them. I had no reason to think that they would be a problem of any kind. Otherwise, I would have mentioned them to you. But now, there's concern that these neighbors might have something to do with the weird demon that showed up. Protection from demons? No. I'll pay my neighbors a visit. I'm sure we can work out our differences out like good neighbors, one way or another. And then Megalith sort of storms off, and again, they used that, including the dialogue, for a house ad about straightening out any problems with neighbors. It's so peculiar. I don't know what was going through their heads with this stuff. Flashback to Armor and Silverstreak. They ride down on a Jeep to check out what's going on with these neighbors. Most of the town looks really run down, but there's some parts like the supermarket and a church that are ultra modern. Townspeople are less than welcoming. They also all have weird boils and blisters and such. Even the kids. Everybody also speaks in this atrocious southern drawl. It's almost as offensive as my French Canadian. The local yokels get shotgun happy trying to drive off our heroes, earns them a sock in the jaw. Eventually the whole town turns on them and starts throwing rocks. Luckily, Armor brought his nunchaku and manages to whack them mostly away. Megalith eventually shows up to join in on the fun. We start seeing more and more mutated people, including a sheriff 4 arms. No obvious relation to Gogol. And then finally, the hostilities stop when some dime store Marvel mega villain shows up, dressed in armor, vaguely resembles Dr. Polaris. He's got gold and purple armor, but an open face and sort of a Count Nefaria look to him, but with a brown goatee, pointy. Things have gotten a little too wild, so our heroes run off with the 4-armed sheriff, hook him up to that truth helmet from last issue. So apparently all these guys came out of the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. Eventually one day, this megalomaniacal armored guy shows up to tell them, hey, you're my chosen people. I'm going to take you to the promised land. This guy is the nuclear warlock. Feels like something from a Schoolhouse Rock. His whole job is to get people to pronounce nuclear correctly. I'll be honest, I grew up with the generation, I say nuclear just as much as the next guy. Yeah, I was embarrassed when President Bush did it, but we're both Texans, leave us alone. But no, this is the new clear space warlock, and he can apparently fly in bursts of flame. A biblical reference, if you missed that. He helps them build their newfangled elements of their town. The shelves are well stocked. You see a kid carrying off a Captain Power and the, Future Force was it called? He's got the logo on the box, so he's getting some toys. One thing they didn't build was a school. School? What the heck do you need godless schooling for? The nuclear warlock taught us everything we need to know. Amazing Heroes Preview Special number 133. This is issue number 133, I should point out. Cover dated January 15th, 1988. Revengers credited to Elliot Maggin, Neal Adams, and inkers Ian Aiken and Brian Garvey. In Revengers number 5, we will be finishing the tragic story of the nuclear warlock, a man who, suffering from radiation poisoning, seeks a cure in magic. As these two forces fight through his body, more of both is needed. The warlock has lured a township of uneducated people to his haven to help him create both. The people in turn fall victim to the radiation and then the magic dispensed by the nuclear warlock. Issues number 6 through 7 concern an alien invasion of the UN building by unearthly young aliens. The secret origin of these strange creatures and their meaning to the future of mankind will be far-reaching indeed. Look for these 2 issues to spin off a new comic titled Hybrids, scheduled to be penciled by Larry Stroman. This leads us to issue number 5, or yet to be named Revengers. I guess this is sort of the equivalent of the Defenders, the non-team. They're getting scalded by a demon saying, welcome to hell. The story is the Nuclear Warlock Chapter 2. This time the additional dialogue is by Peter Stone, otherwise same creative team. Coloring is by Ava Grinberg. Apparently everything was fine at first, but then those extra arms started growing out of the sheriff's rib cage. Other townsfolk have their own mutations. They take it up with the Nuclear Warlock. He calls them stupid, ungrateful curs. Did you think I could give you paradise and you would not have to give a part of yourself as I have? Paradise on earth in exchange for the small imperfections of your body, and this is too large a price to pay. And so aside from being mutant freaks, also they don't get to educate their children, which is deeply offensive to Megalith. Again, I'm pretty sure writer proxy here. If kids don't go to school, how are they going to learn their Hollow Earth theories? Heroes go back town to try to liberate it from his own ignorance, end up fighting one of them newfangled Cereburuses. followed by a giant spider. One of the Cerebroses proves strong enough to actually bite through Megalith's thigh, leaving those white pants awful bloody.
Yeah, looks real bad. You're probably gonna die. Can I have your stuff?
While Armor takes things in stride, Silver Streak is a bit more superstitious. He feels like they're walking to literal hell. There's even a sign that states, "Surrender up your soul to the flame eternal, all ye who enter here." More demons show up, but they can't stand up to Armor stabbing them in the brain, which gives Silver Streak some confidence, so he absorbs some of the flames they're breathing and then shoots it back at them. That clinches it. This can't be hell. Everything here is real. It's physical. It's not metaphysical. So they work their way down into the pit. They find out that the nuclear warlock has built a crude nuclear reactor. Silver Streak appears to absorb some of that radiation, uses it to blast the nuclear warlock. So having more or less defeated the nuclear warlock, he's revealed that he wasn't the one who was turning people into freaks, that the radiation from a plant had done that to them, that he had all these tumors growing on his brain, and that his magic was the only thing keeping everybody alive. He finally explains, "I'm not a warlock, I'm a nuclear technician. My real name is Horace Quark. I was very good at my job. I was on the night shift. We had a skeleton crew running the plant. I had felt a rumble, felt like a small earthquake. Maybe it was nothing at all, but next thing you know, we had a leak in my section. The door sealed automatically. It was 2 hours before anyone with the authority to get me out got there. Of course, they sent me to specialists. The diagnosis was unanimous and fatal. The most optimistic, give me a year. Day and night, I studied every book I could get my hands on for 2 hopeless months as radiation riddled my body. I refused routine medical treatment like a fool. Then money brought me to magic, and magic brought me to demonology. I was successful in raising and containing a very powerful demon, one that was willing to deal. Basically, it traps a demon and explains to it that he won't release it unless he gets the power to save himself. If he doesn't get the power, he's just going to leave the demon trapped in a pentagram. I made a deal with the demon and he destroyed me for my arrogance. He stopped my radiation poisoning with a spell he taught me, but I had gone too far and now only radiation would bring me back. I went back to the plant and asked my friends for help. I had to have my own source of radiation and the magic had given me powers. I seduced a town full of people to come here and build my reactor. They were easily fooled. My only requirement was that these people be very ignorant so they wouldn't suspect. So they wouldn't, well, know the danger I was going to expose them to. And so basically to contain his demonic energies and suppress the damage the radiation had done to his body, he needed radiation to absorb, and that's why the people were helping him build the reactor. Now, I don't quite get the resolution. Essentially, they can't do anything to the nuclear warlock, so they make him help build a school and help the people who he'd done harm to, but he still would need the nuclear radiation, I assume, to maintain his situation, so I'm not sure what good this does, but a resolution of a sort is made. Oh, and then there's an advertisement for subscribing to Continuity Comics. I'd like to know how this works. You'd have to pay $12 for one title of a book that would come out maybe once, twice a year. This is for a 6-issue subscription, so again, that's $2 an issue for these 6 issues, which would probably take about 9 years to come out. Still better than a subscription of Martin Wagner's Hepcats. Oh, and this issue ends in an advertisement for the actual Megalith, the Ultimate Man #1 ongoing series, as well as Revengers, because you need an ad for the book you're currently holding. At this point, Crazyman is still coming, by the way. Now, I would love to move on to Revengers #6, the final issue of the volume, if only because it'd be nice to know if these guys ever actually call themselves the Revengers. I've not encountered a circumstance where that has happened, but because I want to get to all the people that would be sort of kind of referred to as the Revengers, there isn't time to address this issue since it introduced a whole other super team concept that's going to get their own miniseries. Things get a little more interesting with the Amazing Heroes preview special #5, summer 1987. Armor and Silver Streak are credited to Neal Adams, Tom Grinberg, and Rudy Nebras. All of the books published by Continuity, the Flying Dutchman of comics, will be going newsstand or are being renumbered, starting over with #1. Jack and Jock Keaton, again, they're spelling it Jock. By this time, several issues of the book have come out. It should be clear that it's Jacques, but probably part of the problem is that they otherwise recycle copy from the previous preview special with regards to the synopsis. Later in the book, apparently what we have in the past 61 preview specials been calling Megalith is actually a book called The Revengers. The real Megalith will actually make his debut in October. Honest, that's what they told us. On the other hand, no one at Continuity seems to know what it is, aside from it not being The Revengers, a description that would fit most comics, or even who's writing or drawing it. Given Continuity's past record of putting out even those comics they knew who was doing what, you most likely shouldn't hold your breath for this one, but this may just be a sour old previewer speaking. See the Revengers preview for a quick recap of what Megalith isn't, and then once you get to Revengers, it's pretty much a postage stamp. Written and illustrated by Neal Adams. See the Megalith entry for details on the confusion surrounding the title. We don't want to go through it one more time. Armor and Silver Streak will be popping up in this book, as will Samuree, and even that guy Megalith, whose book we all thought this was. For more detailed synopsis of future issues, we advise you to check our previous AH preview preview specials because we're tired of running the same continuity previews over and over again. Ouch. From the Slings and Arrows comic guide, Samuree. As one would surmise from the title, this is a superhero comic with martial arts overtones, and as one would expect from the publishers, it marries beautiful artwork with nonsensical stories. 1 through 4 are particularly notable for the bottom-obsessed pencils of Mark Beecham that are as near pornographic as they are accomplished. As ever with a continuity title, the hand of Neal Adams is rarely far away, and the other artists, S. Clark Hallbacker, Rodney Ramos, and Dave Hoover, all benefit from his touch. The second series is 4 chapters of the Rise of Magic crossover. It's less superhero-oriented, aiming instead for a supernatural theme and ending up even more impenetrable than before. Rudy Nebres inks some very poor pencils in 1 and 2 and 4, and future star Mike Deodato enlivens things in 3. Another great Adams discovery, Rodolfo DiMaggio, drew both Windjammer issues with some aplomb, rounding off a series that offers the occasional treat for the eyes, if not the brain. So the continuity comics series within a series has been a very odd undertaking to me. Some of these comic books I've properly read, some of them I've skimmed, some of them I've relied heavily on materials I've gotten off the internet or issues of Amazing Heroes. Most of these series I'm experiencing either for the first time or have never experienced them to anywhere near the degree that I am currently. It's also been an odd podcast recording experience because normally I have a pretty clear idea of what I'm going to do with a podcast. I record what I intended. Maybe there's something left over, I'll set that off to the side for another show, but usually I just let the thing run long, get it all over with, and be done with it. This one, because of the quote-unquote writing of Neal Adams, has been extremely challenging because you've got series that just stop coming out. You've got series with seemingly never-ending permutations, no complete story told from beginning to end. Titles are showing up willy-nilly. My understanding is that because Neal Adams didn't have any backers or investors, he was doing it all himself, he's paying for all these comic books with money he gets from advertising. So he's killing himself doing all this advertising work in order to produce comic books he doesn't really have time to invest in. They're thrown together to some degree, especially on the writing side of it. I think that Adams would tell people what he wanted, maybe do some breakdowns on it, have them go ahead and draw it, and then everything would be figured out at the back end on top of the artwork. And then they wouldn't have a proper release schedule. What would happen is they'd get enough books put together, get a slot from the printer so they get a price break on printing more books all at the same time instead of spacing them out months, and then you just have a run of issues, and then the well would run dry for 6 months, a year, whatever. You got the Armor series and the Megalith series that are both officially Revengers featuring those characters. The Armor series is telling an origin story that takes multiple years to tell, and then it not so smoothly transitions into the Megalith title that started years before the resolution of the Armor story. The main thing I wanted to do was cover their superhero line, but I ended up spending pretty much the entire first episode doing background material on Neal Adams and the people who worked with him, funny animal stuff, European import stuff, licensed stuff. Still managed to go nearly 2 hours. Going into this episode, it was several different chunks of material that I ran out of time to cover. In that first episode, I really wanted to cover all the new heroes, guys like Toy Boy, recorded that segment. That segment is done, but because I want to do the Revengers, and the fourth sort of kind of honorary member of the Revengers is Samuree, bump Toy Boy again to get Samuree in, but also I've got maybe 20 minutes at most to cover Samuree. There's no clear stopping point because, as with Armor, the main story of the series resolves around issue 5, but there's still a cliffhanger. Elements of that are addressed in the 6th issue, but that issue also launches a new story. I made sure to put Samuree on the album art. I wanted to show all the Revengers. I want to get to her in this episode, and yet somehow I end up spending all this time with a Judge Dredd pastiche where clearly Neal Adams went crazy on the cover, trying to show that he could put in as much detail tell is Bolland and actually look a bit like Bolland, or that idiocy that was the nuclear warlock. What even was that? You're stealing Doctor Strange's origin, but marrying it to some sort of toxic Avenger type thing. There's this fascination with pseudoscience, trying to have everything be grounded and realistic in these continuity comics, and then you come up with this idiocy, this foolishness, whatever that nuclear warlock thing was. I don't even understand what the story was. The resolution makes no sense. You've got children being abused and exposed to radiation, and they just sort of laugh it off at the end. And I guess the nuclear warlock is going to continue to be their neighbor. What's going on here? It's so frustrating. These books look so good. There's so much effort put into the artwork. The character designs are all right. Some are better than others, but they're all pretty solid. The characters themselves, when they're allowed to have a personality, aren't unappealing. They're not as deep as one might like them to be, but they're not bad. The stories, though, are just a complete mess. How Neal Adams could be such a brave social justice crusader for comics, easily one of the greatest comic book artists of all time, and like the poster child for Dunning-Kruger effect on believing that he could write comic books for decades. He never understood people have online identities partly based on mocking and ridiculing stories he wrote because they are so insane and so nonsensical and objectively bad storytelling. Interesting, not dull, but he's doing this stuff. He could have gotten away with it in the 70s when everybody was on drugs and you had all kinds of wackadoo stuff. In the 80s, not so much. There was a greater regard for character and plot, and just because you have stories that go on for issue after issue after issue doesn't make you Chris Claremont. And the fact that you don't know how to tell a story in a single issue, and when you do try to tell it in a single issue, it's some craziness like contractors writing girders. It's risible. Reading these comic books is often like the comics equivalent of Mystery Science Theater 3000. You're just sitting there and riffing on the nonsense. And again, because this is a modular podcast, because they had a Crazyman backup feature in that first issue of Megalith, and it made for a nice segue into the Crazyman material that I'd already recorded for the first episode, I put that in there. Hoi Toy Boy, he gets bumped again. And now I really want to talk about Samuree, and there's just not enough time for this character. So I guess the only thing to do is a bit of a deep dive into just the first issue, where she meets the other major heroes of this universe, and we get introduced to her. After being promised since at least 85, 86, Samuree trademark featuring Samuree trademark, Megalith trademark, Armor trademark, Silver Streak trademark number 1, finally has a date, May 1987, minimum of a year of promising this book before it finally shows up. Original story, Neal Adams, pencils, Mark Beecham, lettering, Ken Bruzenak, color, Liz Berube, inks, Ian Aiken, Brian Garvey. Okay, just for a minute now, these credits. Okay, so there's 2 columns of credits. They're all done in type. If you go from left to right, it's credited to penciler, letterer, inks, original story, color. It seems more likely, because there's big gaps between each of the 3 sections, that you're actually supposed to go top, bottom, top, bottom. So that means Neal Adams credits the penciler first. Being an artist and being one of the guys who really pioneered art over writing, makes sense that he would get the pencil out there first, then original story, but then lettering. And I joke, I'm a bit of a coloring bigot. You've got a complete comic book that you can read so long as you've got story, art, letters. You don't have to have colors. So I'm guessing there's an element of this in Neal Adams too, except that he has a line of books that are somewhat known for coloring. Some people hate the coloring of this book, but it was distinctive. There was nothing else out there that looked like this at the time period. And sometimes he was a family member doing the colors besides. But I think more importantly, the lettering on the continuity books is at best middling because of the emphasis on art over everything else. The balloon placements, caption placements were often illogical. It is sometimes difficult to understand how to progress through one of these stories, not helped by all the ellipses everywhere. So normally you could say like, oh, okay, so this balloon ends in ellipses, this one starts in ellipses, so now I see the continuity. But no, there's things like that all over the place, and there's no clear connection from one thing to another, things off time. So if anybody is going to put coloring over lettering in their credits, it should be continuity. But then the last credit is for inks. And one reason why that sort of works is because there's 2 inkers. So one for the top line, one for the bottom line, but still separated into the inking section. But again, inkers redraw the pencils. That's what an inker does. You look at the pencils, you replicate them as best you can in ink, you erase the pencils. The finished artwork is the ink artwork. You're the final artist on the book. And as discussed oft times in this episode, you got guys like Rudy Nebres who are the artists of the book. Perhaps there's enough fidelity to the original artwork to give them credit for breakdowns, layouts, whatever. But the finished artwork, the style, the recognizable qualities of who is drawing this book is often the inker, but you're going to put them last. Nothing about these books makes any sense. So the story starts out with Samuree in Footloose, I'm a maniac outfit, working out. There's 6 figures total of her doing different martial arts moves or lifting weights, plus a headshot. Lots of talk about how in tune she is with her body, how thoroughly she feels her body while she's doing this strenuous working out. She's sweaty, she's taut. She somehow manages to get her jazzercise outfit thonged right up the boo-boo, and she's doing like super high kicks. You have to be like really flexible to pull that off. You can definitely do the splits. Very much fetishizing the body here. And then you turn the page and the first caption is, but for now, she is Daryl Shepard, a 16-year-old girl and so much in love. And then there's some older guy who is Lieutenant Pierce, who is, I guess, going to be her Steve Trevor. Obviously a grown man, and we've emphasized 16-year-old girl. This isn't the 70s. This isn't the era of Steven Tyler adopting an underage girl so that he can take her across state lines and leave her pregnant in an apartment months later. This wasn't okay in 1987, okay? Today, this is so not okay. We're not in a rank Xerox place, but I don't feel good about having physical copies of these books in my possession. Nobody's going to raid me over Samuree. I'm not going to do any jail time, but I don't feel good about having this book. And especially because they make a point of telling that essentially she's doing all this working out, in part to be the mistress of the martial arts, but also seemingly to get the attention of this older man who's not paying attention to her. Lieutenant Pierce is a better man than most of us. He's reading a newspaper. Boy, that pretty much dates this, right? And they're talking about hijack goes awry, bus breaks down, hijackers herd captives into Natural History Museum in New York. 3 notables among the hostages, Jacques Glinot, Dr. Harold O'Hara Miller, and Tom Savini. Yes, it is that Tom Savini. 3rd page. Have no faith in our lead heroine to carry the book through to the 3rd page, but at least measure of equal time because we see the Revengers working out in their gym. All of them are topless. Megalith's wearing the white pants, so you know it's all very form-fitting and everything. They're also reading the newspaper, Armor specifically, and he sees that one of the other people that was noted, the Jacques Linot, is a known quantity. They're talking about how this is believed to be the father of the Silver Streak. So this is a revelation to me. I guess it makes sense because if I recall correctly, all 3 of the Jacques, Jacqueline siblings have different colored hair. I guess it would make sense that they would have some variance in parentage, but apparently one of the kidnapped victims is the father of the Silver Streak. So I guess they all have the same mom then. Too bad they killed off parents, and I don't think ever resolved that so we would know how the genealogy works on this thing. And so we go to page 6. We're back to Samuree. She is using her ninja stealth skills to go into the museum. She stumbles upon a SWAT team. It's funny because, again, I talk about the politics of Neal Adams in the show a few times. He's supposed to be a lefty, but he's definitely a Camelot, Great Society, establishment Democrat type because he's talking about how the SWAT team, they're going in, they're going to try to save the hostages. They're not going to take any chances because the utmost concern of the SWAT team is the safety of the hostages. They're not going to put anybody in harm's way. They're all about protecting, not about shooting people, getting their man, any of the kind of stuff that we know SWAT people actually do. A lot of this deferential stuff, most of the people involved with the Revengers seem to have some sort of a government contact that's helping them out. They're all very altruistic. It's all rather naive. But taking that into account, Samuree proceeds to beat up all the SWAT team guys because they're being too noisy and they're going to get somebody killed. And because they won't just stop and they won't listen to the commands of the 16-year-old with the thong, she just proceeds to beat them up and knock them all out, which is perhaps not backing the blue. So are you with these guys or not? The captions say one thing, the actions of your heroes say another thing. They are constantly beating up members of the military, members of the SWAT team. Your lips are saying one thing, your actions are saying another. Then we see the hostages, and it's funny because there's the image of Tom Savini pretty clearly is a Xerox copy of an existing photograph and not, for the most part, being drawn. It's a strong indication that Mark Beecham just decided to take it easy for that one panel. So Samuree slams into this wall of meat, and having read later issues of this book before reading the first one, my first assumption was that it was one of the guys who's going to show up later in the series. It ends up being Megalith, but she manages to get away from him, and then she runs into the other 2 Revengers, and they're all fighting in the dark in the museum. As a person who just has martial arts skills and not even really that many weapons, she essentially just uses the sword. She does pretty well against these superpowered beings, although at the same time, I think they recognize that this is clearly not one of the terrorists, maybe treating her with kid gloves. She does have a fight with Armor. They do respect one another's fighting skills. They do fight to a standstill, but while that's happening, Megalith walks up and grabs Samuree by the arms and basically says, okay, enough of this. We're not going to fight you anymore. Everybody kind of explains what they're doing there, and they figure, well, let's all work together. But Samuree's also like, but you guys are going to have to be quieter because you're you're harshing my ninja style. The group run into one SWAT member that got ahead of the others, I guess, force him to be quiet and do what they say. So again, maybe not the regard for authority that the captions would just. The group decides to stealthily jump onto a replica whale that's hanging above where the terrorists are holding the hostages, and then they drop down from the whale and start beating everybody up. It is funny because while continuity has tended to be violent in general, not a lot of blood. It's mostly been like alien entrails and stuff. This book, Samuree does not hold back with her sword. There is a lot of splashes of blood. It feels like, hey, we got Tom Savini in this book and we're going to go to a Tom Savini place with this. Also think that there's just such a sheer mass of crotch shots and butt shots. And even though there's a much stronger Neal Adams quality to the artwork in this issue than some of the later issues, Mark Beecham is clearly adding the emphases you would expect Mark Beecham to add to these people's bodies, particularly the young lady's body. And I guess there was a sense of there being a license to go a little bit further with this one. This one's just a bit edgier than the other ones. There's one particularly cool shot where Armor throws this fat dagger thing, almost like a mini machete, and it goes into the forearm of one of the terrorists. He's holding his gun in his left hand. It goes into the arm, but apparently it's just superficial enough so that you can see the skin of the forearm wrinkle as though it were a sleeve rolling up. It's essentially degloved by this dagger. It's gross and totally cool. There is a problem, and this is going to be a problem throughout the series. Superpowered dudes show up the mistress of the martial arts in her own book. She's pretty clearly the least powerful, least capable person of the group for several issues of her own series. But one moment that does help to even the scales a little bit, Armor's getting into a fight, gets encircled by terrorists, and they just start capping him. And he's taking all kinds of shots. And the dude's name is Armor, and this is pretty much the first time I can think of where we're seeing that aspect play out, where he's covered everywhere but his mouth and eyeballs, the eyeball, with alien armor, and therefore is essentially bulletproof. It hurt, but he's going to get up after this. So the fact, though, is that he still manages to get dropped while the girl is running around. And by the way, she does not look like any kind of samurai. I love, there's a reference to her putting on samurai garb, but it's like she's wearing something you'd see on the runway. Nothing remotely practical. She's got thigh-high boots. The upper thighs, buttocks, and most of the groin area is completely exposed, because when you're doing martial arts, you definitely don't want to have anything covering you if you happen to get kicked or fall or whatever. Then she's got what looks to be a one piece that goes from the crotch area up to her neck. She has a little bit of a crease collar thing going on there, or a little bit of a turtleneck thing going on, but it's flat. And then she has puffy sleeves at the shoulders, big shoulders, very 80s. And then she has leather gloves that go up to her elbow, down to her knuckles, and then she has exposed fingers. Sorry, not the knuckles at the palm, and then she has exposed fingers from there. She also wears a headband. Barely communicates ninja, and this is definitely chic ninja. Definitely nothing to do with a samurai. We tend to associate them with armor, lots of padding, things like that. She's got a sword and a wedgie and a camel toe. But it is cool because she used that sword to do things like chop off both Achilles tendons, chop off knees. She is merciless. And so the terrorists have been knocked out. Most of the hostages have been recovered. I don't think they have any fatalities on the hostage front. But then a skylight gets busted out. Someone shoots the SWAT guy that was helping them. Somebody drops smoke bombs or gas pellets or something so that it obscures visibility. And then these weird looking dudes with special goggles come down and grab just 3 of the hostages, the 3 that I highlighted earlier on, and escape. And then that's the end of the first issue, which is a decent break point from the series. Cover, once again, Neal Adams. Neal Adams is known for being a great cover artist, not necessarily on his own titles though, because again, the first issue of Samuree is not a strong example of how you would start a book. This is very much an issue 2 cover as opposed to issue 1. Samuree, she's got a sai in one hand, she's got a katana in the other hand. She's got the katana sideways, sort of like gangsta style, but with a samurai sword. And then she's got her left arm behind her back, holding the sai downward. Not sure what that's supposed to be. Lots of hip. And then she's framed by the fists of Armor holding nunchucks. And she says, "Armor, sheathe your weapon or I'll be forced to maim you." 2 ellipses. And then in a whisper, he replies, "Try it." You don't want to have a conversation going on your first issue cover. You want to be able to see both of the parties. You probably don't want your heroine obscured for a quarter of the cover by some other dude's hands. I don't think Armor is recognizable enough, especially in the globular area, for people to know who that is. She has to actually call him Armor. Either preserve the mystery or give us more armor so we know that that's who the guy is. Don't tell us, show us. You're an artist. You're one of the greatest artists. You should know this. I'm going to talk a lot about Samuree next time. As you may have noted, I have a bit of enthusiasm for the character. I just don't think there's time for that today, so I'll try to get this third edition out before 9 months pass. If this takes until 2024, keep it in the flavor of continuity comics.
And finally, amazing listeners, OJ666 like the ANIA, the Association of Black Comic Book Publishers Tumblr. Pablo Ogondo and the Rays liked Continuity Comics Studios Graphics Associates Volume 1, The New Heroes. And on Twitter, we were attended to by the 20th Century Geek Podcast, 21st Century Boys, Andrew Fear, Go, Anime Freaks, Anime Nostalgia, Dr. Ange, Bat Shapirak, Between the Pages, Big T Lil Odd, who had a big shout out to Earth 4, Billy Hines, Canoes, Caroline Wells, Casey Hyper, Charlton Hero, Chris at Bad Books for Beginners, Chris Dunford, Chris Leiden, Coffee and Comics, Darren and Ruth Sutherland, Del Dracula, Dr. Pop Culture BGSU, Dirk Ashton, Erico. The Frogurt is also cursed, Gregory Litchfield, The Hammer Strikes, Random Geeky Stuff. He did the Monster Max, History of Comics on Film, Io's Joe Is, Jim and Bruglia, Jeffrey Brown They Them, King Dinosaur, King Size Comics Giant Size Fun Podcast, Liz Ann Oswalt, Lauren Skin Kissart, Luke Giaconetti of Earth Destruction Directive, Manuel Carmona by Truthful Comics at Indie Planet, The Max of the Red Death, Real at Mike at Rihanna Mike at Sandalias to Me, Oliver Simonson of Cerebus Film, Professor Frenzy, Raven X Fields, Resurrections, an Adam Warlock and Thanos podcast, Richard Field, Roger Preeb, Sean McLaughlin, Siskoid, Sleepy Reader, Talk Nerdy to Me, Wonder Woman Warrior for Peace podcast, and Xenozoic Xenophiles.
The preceding podcast is a not-for-profit informational work. Any copyrighted materials contained are believed covered under fair use. No copyright infringement is intended. This has been a Rolled Spine podcast.